Hello everyone and welcome once again to fSobriety. I am Craig Woods.
And I am James Hamilton. Craig, how have you been lately?
I'm not too bad, James. I'm just back from a wee stroll in Camp Elegance. I cannot guarantee that my companion returned with me.
Harsh.
How about you? What's been happening?
I've just been having a disappointing season finale, you know.
I feel like
usual.
I feel like that could be a reference to something.
It's almost like that we're referencing the two things we're going to be discussing today.
Yeah, it's almost like we planned this.
On this episode of fSobriety entitled... We usually have a title going in, or at least an idea of a title, and I just realised there that we don't have it. I thought maybe you had one up the sleeve that you could drop in.
No, not on this occasion, sorry. Well, despite this fumble at the start of the episode, James... This is actually going to be a tighter episode than the previous one, with none of that malarkey that so plagued our previous episode, which hopefully most of you enjoyed.
Yeah, the constant interruptions of other podcasts.
This is a very concise, very streamlined, very efficient podcast.
We'll get to Fargo in a minute, though, right?
Well, funny you should say that, James. We are going to get to Fargo in just a minute. But... we do have the unfinished business of Lovecraft Country to attend to. And given the time and energy we have devoted to this show, I think it's only right that we sign things off with talking a bit more about those final few episodes and underlining the whole thing with our thoughts on the finale and wrapping up with our feelings about the series as a whole.
Yep, let's exorcise the demons of this show from the podcast.
Call the voodoo
from our
priestess.
Mr. Robot themed podcast that has mostly been about Lovecraft Country up to this point. We'll get back to Mr. Robot in a minute, guys.
Yeah, in a minute. More Mr. Robot coming, definitely in a minute. For those of you who have been hanging around waiting for our Mr. Robot rewatch to recommence, it is going to recommence on our next episode. We have not forgotten, guys. It's just that, Lovecraft Country has been a thing, and now Fargo is a thing, and, there are only so many hours in the day.
Before we begin talking about Lovecraft Country, Craig, in all seriousness, what have you been up to since we last recorded? Are there any exciting news related to our chosen subjects? Any new musical discoveries that you've been into?
Usually there is, isn't
there? Have you watched anything exciting?
I finished watching The Haunting of Bly Manor, which I believe I mentioned on our previous episode. It was an experience. I still recommend it. It's worth a watch. I think I was saying just how spooky I was finding the first few episodes. It becomes decidedly less spooky after those first couple of episodes,
right.
Which was a bit disappointing, but it does become a very emotionally affecting melodrama after that, which I kind of expected because The Haunting of Hill House, which was Mike Flanagan's previous series, did a similar sort of thing, but the horror in that series was actually very different from Bly Manor. There was a lot of very visual horror, a lot of kind of jump scares, and I don't mean that as a criticism. If you've not watched Haunting of Hill House, I know you haven't, James, but to the listener, I highly recommend it. It is a very effective horror drama. Bly Manor does a similar kind of thing with the way it basically turns a horror story into a melodrama, but the style of horror is very different. But I became a lot less interested in the horror aspect of this season round about episode 4. But I was already invested in the characters by that point, so it wasn't really a bad thing. The last episode, I have to say, was extremely emotional. Have your hankies nearby. That's all I'm going to say.
All right.
Has an amazing... all of Mike Flanagan's stuff I actually really enjoy. Well, not all of it. I mean, he's had... as a kind of contemporary horror auteur... I think he's had more hits than misses, though, and I don't think you can say that about many horror auteurs. So I actually think he's doing a pretty good job. But he's got his regular repertory company of actors that he often uses, and a few of them turn up in this, as they did in Haunting of Hill House. And it's nice when you enter into an artist's work that way, where you start to notice all the familiar faces, just as you start to notice all the familiar stylistic tics and whatever. You start to feel like you're kind of part of a wee club sort of thing. I quite enjoy that process. So I was kind of digging when members of the cast would turn up in small roles. I thought, oh, that's such and such who had a much larger role previous season or in that other project. So yeah, that was definitely quite enjoyable. The only thing I would warn you about is if you have a particular aversion to crimes against accents. then just brace yourself, because there are some pretty bad ones. I always forget this actor's name, and he has turned up in quite a few of Mike Flanagan's projects, but he was Elliot in E.T. He's actually a great actor, and he's decent in this, but he is doing like an upper crust English accent, or his best appropriation of one. And yeah, handle with care.
I saw that your man from iZombie was in it.
Who's
but you didn't watch iZombie.
I did not
so
watch iZombie. Who's that?
Who I'm talking about. I'll be fucked if I can remember the actor's name.
Is he a handsome, square-jawed fella? He
is an Indian fella.
Oh, he must be. Yeah, he plays Owen. Yeah, I don't know that actor's name.
But he was a regular, one of the main principal cast members of iZombie.
Right, okay. He's actually great in this, by the way. Yeah, Carla Gugino pops up, and I always really like her, and she was in Haunting of Hill House as well. But the thing that really bothered me about it is they have her, for some reason, I don't know why they've got her doing this English accent. I don't know why they didn't just get a British actor to do it. I mean, I guess Mike Flanagan likes Carla Gugino, sue him. In fairness, I'm impressed with her ability to do all the English accents. It's just a shame she does them over the course of a single sentence. But all that said, I still recommend it.
I will check it out just in time for the annual Spooky Day.
Oh yeah.
For anyone who's wondering, we're recording this a matter of days before Halloween.
Exactly.
Unfortunately,
due to our before Goth Christmas.
Due to our output rate, you won't hear this until probably about 3 weeks after Halloween.
Yeah. So sorry about that, listeners. If we had planned a wee bit better, maybe we should have done a wee Halloween-themed podcast. But once we get used to our own output rate and how we can forecast a bit better, then we'll see what we can do. Maybe we'll try something for Christmas, something Yuletide themed,
like a Mr. Robot Christmas special, if you will.
Yeah. At the moment, hey, it's capitalism, am I right?
Hell yes.
We got to work, we got to sell our labour, sell our time, and somewhere along the way, find time to do this nonsense. This nonsense that is infinitely more meaningful than any of the other stuff we do.
If you'd like to help out with this nonsense, why not check out our Patreon?
I was about to say, did you actually set up a Patreon and not tell me?
No.
Watch this space is all I'm saying.
If you set up a Patreon, you have to give people like rewards, and like we have a hard enough time actually putting out podcasts without giving people extras.
Yeah, it has to.
If we think of something though,
yeah, watch this space. We'll revisit.
Well, I have been continuing slowly my watching of season 1 of Homecoming. And it's,
how you enjoying
as you say, similarly, what you spot people in the Sam Ishmael club. And I'm really enjoying it. I think episode 7 I'm on, or was the last one I watched, and it gets real dark real quick. Like, it's not exactly a light and tone show.
No.
But when the shoe drops in episode 7, it's like...
It's a really unique show. I think having Sam Esmail's directorship on that show that he didn't write, even though the subject matter is very much in his kind of wheelhouse, you can tell it's different writers. But his directorial vision adds so much to that story in a way that when I try and imagine it being done by another director, I just don't see how it would ever be as effective. I mean, that storyline is so odd anyway. I mean, you're trying to describe that show to people, they're just like, it's set in a what now? I mean, the whole idea is just so kind of off the wall and so left field that it really takes someone of Sam Esmail's particular vision to bring that kind of thing to life. One of the things I find interesting about it is that he really throws in all the cinematic tricks in a way in which another show that would feel it too much. It would feel like, okay, we get it. You've seen Kubrick. We get it. You've seen Antonioni. Like, fucking calm down. For some reason, the more he does that on that show, the more effective it becomes, and the more it seems like the characters themselves are sort of not quite sure whether they're in a hyper-real fictional world or not. Yeah, it's great stuff. I tried recommending it to people, but it is a difficult show to recommend.
It took me this long to watch it, and I am a full-on Sam Ishmael / Mr. Robot super fanboy. And it took me this long to get round to watching it. But boy, I wish I'd watched it earlier, because Bobby Cannavale's performance in it is...
Cannavale is how you pronounce it.
Cannavale. Bobby Can of Cannavales.
Open up a can of lols.
It's going to open up a can of Valleys on you. But yeah, Bobby Cannavale's performance is incredible. The conviction he delivers, that monologue in episode 7. Don't know if you remember the one I'm talking about.
I haven't.
But basically, when he reveals the purpose of the whole thing.
Right, yeah.
Man, he's terrifying. He's got that Irvin thing going on where he's really nice, and then suddenly he just, on a dime, like, is, you know...
He's a phenomenal actor. He's definitely in my top 10 list of all-time favourite actors. I love watching him in anything. He's always got that intensity, no matter what he's doing. He is one of those actors that he can transform even bad material into good material. But when he's got
Jumanji,
good material,
Welcome to the Jungle?
I have not, but I know he's in that.
He's great in it.
Yeah.
Carry on, I interrupted you there with my Jumanji chat.
No, I was just going to say it's when he's got great material, it's, you know, it's cream of the crop. It's the best. That's what you want. If only all televisual entertainment could be that good. And it's just the thrill of watching a performer who takes the art that seriously. It's spellbinding to watch. You watched Boardwalk Empire, yeah?
I watched season 1. I've not seen beyond season 1.
Oh, really? Holy shit!
Yeah.
It's either season 2 or season 3 that Bobby Cannavale has a major role in. Oh, he is amazing in it. He is terrifying in it. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to ruin anything, but yeah,
I'll get round to that.
Yeah, Boardwalk Empire is actually a solid show pretty much all the way through. The only thing it sort of stumbles at the end because it basically got prematurely cancelled. So their final season, they had to do a big time jump to get to the planned ending of the story, and it does feel a wee bit disjointed and a wee bit sort of alienating when that season starts, but once you get into the swing of it, it is actually a solid season. But there is that sense of loss. You come away from going, there should have been more to that story. But for what it is, it's still a great show.
I watched the new Borat movie.
Oh yeah, when you told me you mentioned that to me last week, I did not know the actual title of that film, and when you told me, I actually thought you were making a joke. And I like that Sacha Baron Cohen is now at a point in his career where he's just naming his projects things you or I would say is a joke.
Yeah, it's pretty great. His parody is got to the point where he self-parodies while parodying, because people know, if people like see Borat or see him as Borat, they're like, oh, it's Borat. So because he is a celebrity in the right of the character that he's playing, as Borat, he has to wear disguises and act like other people,
right?
In order to carry. So he's gone like it's Boratception. He goes like twice as deep. I think it's been roundly agreed by critics that the best thing about Borat 2 is Maria Bakalova, I think is the name of the actress that plays Borat's daughter, because she is a revelation. She's incredible. She is hilarious. She's as fearless, and her improvisational skills are every bit as good as Sacha Baron Cohen's. There's one point in the film that I'm not going to spoil, but her facade cracks at one point while she's giving a speech to a conservative women's group, but she pulls it back. But you can tell that she's like trying not to buckle with laughter at what she's saying. It's pretty amazing. And then, of course, it's got the whole creepy Rudy Giuliani scene, which is just horrific.
Oh, boy. I tell you something, by the way, every time we get back together to record one of these podcasts, I know there is a ton of stuff I want to get around to talking about, but so much of this, I tell you, man, this year particularly, I do just feel like we're living in a John Smith 2000 AD story from the early 90s, because every single page or every single panel is just a new madcap scenario, and you're somehow just left to knit it together, and at the end you just have to accept it. None of it really makes coherent sense, but you just have to accept also that it's somehow important and that you experienced a thing. I feel that's basically 2020 in a nutshell, and I sort of feel a bit self-conscious about saying that, because I don't want to be one of those people that's constantly saying, haha, 2020, what a bad year, eh? Like people did about 2016 because some rock stars died. You know, all of the things that are wrong with 2020 are still going to be wrong with 2021. So, yeah, I think we need to get out of that groove. But I have to say, there's something about just living in this present moment where every time we get in front of these microphones, I'm like, oh, I should mention this. But there's just so fucking much to mention now that I'm at a point where I'm like, well, let's try and make this more about escapism.
Yeah.
And in a way, I realise that's kind of reactionary, but I don't. In a way, it's like self-care, you know. And hopefully, people who enjoy listening to this stuff, first of all, God help you, although also thank you, then maybe they just want a bit of escapism as well, you know.
To be fair, I always assumed this was a slightly controversial opinion, but I don't think there's anything wrong with escapism when faced with the horrors of outside world. You know, people, if you need to take a step back, and just be like, I'm going to treat myself well. Maybe ignore something for a little bit. It's a privilege to be able to do that. But
it is,
if
but
you've
as
got
long
the
as you've
privilege
got-
to be able
exactly,
to do that,
exactly.
why not?
Yeah. Besides, I think we have a way of segueing off onto quote-unquote more serious topics whenever we're discussing the random nonsense that we get to talking about, which, by the way, we will get to. Take a drink every time we say we're getting to that in a minute. That's your challenge, listeners. Make this into a game.
There was only one other thing I wanted to talk about real
that?
briefly. I've been listening to a lot of Divide and Dissolve this week.
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
Really great noise, doom stuff, which is a genre that I find difficult to enjoy a lot of the time. But they are really good. I believe they're an Australian duo.
They are Australian, yeah. Yeah, and that genre as well was something that alienated me quite a long time ago. I mean, I did, because I, like yourself, I had so many friends and whatever who were involved in like experimental music and stuff. And I always had a bit of an interest in it, but somewhere 6-7 years ago I started to become really just disinterested in it for reasons that I think we explored in our very first episode of this podcast. But there's a few acts within that sort of framework that do still excite me a wee bit, and they are one of them.
Yeah, I think it's probably has a lot to do with the fact that one, they're both women. Two, one of them is Maori, and one of them is, I believe, she's of Native American heritage.
Yeah,
if I remember correctly, and they kind of frame their music as an anti-colonial, the decolonization kind of themes like black supremacy, and it's they've got an album coming out on, is it Invada Records? Jeff Barrow out of that Portishead in that Beak, his record label, he's putting it out, so pretty excited for that.
Since we're on a musical note there, no pun intended, or was it? I don't know. New Jungle Pussy just landed.
Oh yeah,
it's pretty great. It's short and sweet as the previous releases. Every track is a raucous affair. It's like going, I think there's 10 tracks on it. That sounds about right. It's like having 10 rounds of drinks with Jungle Pussy, and at the end, she's still standing, but I'm a complete wreck. Yeah,
we've talked about Jungle Pussy before in this podcast, and she is a tremendous MC.
Amazing.
And an absolutely adorable personality, frankly.
100%.
She's great.
And she's one of those artists that has a real particular aesthetic. And I know we did talk about this a wee bit in our first episode, but I have a feeling we will talk about Jungle Pussy more in the future. Just put a pin in that. But she also has an amazing... I love the quality of her voice. Like, being a good MC is not just about having bars. A lot of my favourite MCs, I fall in love with the voice as much as what they can do with, wordplay and what they can do in terms of rhymes. And there's just something about the quality of her voice that's kind of authoritative and sexy and funny all at the same time. Yeah, she's great. Anyway, JP4 is the imaginative title that she gave the new album. It is, by the way, yes, her 4th LP. How did you guess?
Check it out. Ariana Grande, or to give her
I figured you might mention this.
Boroana Grande dropped a new track and video this week, which I watched many times. Her track-wise, not as exciting to me as her... a lot of the stuff off her previous album, but the video is adorable as fuck. She's the president. I
saw the one she was hanging out with the postal workers. Somebody had posted that online as a meme with the caption, "Solidarity with Comrade Ariana."
On that same note, before I go on that, there's another musical thing I want to say, which is Dessa dropped a new track as well.
On
her Bandcamp. It is pretty great and worth checking out. But speaking of solidarity and people like organising and joining the fight, did you see the video? I saw it on Instagram, but it was an Instagram live video that Diane Guerrero took of her just going door to door, getting people, like, encouraging people to vote for the new DA.
No, I
man,
not.
Could you imagine Diane Guerrero comes to your fucking door?
I have imagined it.
It's like, I'd like you to vote for, and I'd be like, stop right there, I'll vote for whatever you tell me to.
Yeah.
She'd be like, if she came round to my door and was like, I'd like you to vote for having your legs removed, I'd be like, fuck my legs, don't need them. But yeah, it's pretty great. It's basically she's just filming herself going around door to door delivering these things. I'll send you the link when I figure out how to send Instagram links.
Cool. I look forward to it. Always up for Diane Guerrero action.
She is one of the good ones. And the thing is, my favourite part of the video is when she goes to people's doors, like a few people, they go like, who is it, before they answer. I don't know if that's just a suburban American thing, but she never says, hi, I'm Diane Guerrero. I'm an actress. She always says, "Hi, my name's Diane. I'm with the group, and we're trying to." She, it's just like she's like, "I'm a community worker." She's like, "I'm part of a community action group. My name's Diane," and I'm like, "You're crazy, Jane." Just open with that, man. Oh.
She's fabulous. All right. Anyway,
so that's my news roundup.
All right, James. Shall we finally deal with this albatross of Lovecraft Country that we've been labouring under for the past few episodes? I think
let's open the book of names and let's finally
let's complete this ritual and exorcise these demons
because we're white.
And that's right. No magic. We have no magic. It's spoiler.
Spoiler alert for the ending of Lovecraft Country. But yeah, here we go.
Okay, so James, last time we spoke, we were given our freewheeling thoughts on episodes 7 to 9. Episode 9 had just aired the last time we spoke.
Yes, it had.
So the last time we spoke about this show in any depth was when we talked about episode 4, and we had some significant problems with actually we both enjoyed episode 4 pretty much, but I certainly had significant problems with the ending of that episode.
And if the internet is to be believed, you were not alone.
It seems that way, and we've kind of been given brief cursory feedback, as it were, reflections on our feelings about the show since then. So before we talk about the finale, there's a few things I want to talk about just in a wee bit more depth that we did not quite get to talking about when we were talking about episodes 5 to 9. 5 and 6 we maybe don't need to speak too much about. I think we did cover most of what I wanted to say there a couple of episodes ago. I don't know if I mentioned this. Did I mention this on the podcast? Just how great that transformation scene was at the end of episode 5.
You did. The effects, because I.
You know what? I'm going to mention it again because it was absolutely phenomenal. It's one of the best such transformations like that I've ever seen. I'm sure at least 70% of the entire season's budget went on that one scene.
Well, we said it before, and I'll say it again. There were some dodgy visual effects in the first few episodes of Lovecraft Country.
I've said it before, but I'll say it again before. But I'll say I've said it before, but I'll say it again.
Wait, I thought you were going to say something there. We had mentioned prior to this that we felt that some of the visual effects were a bit dodgy in the show, but then upon the transformation scene happening, we were like, I guess they were saving the effects budget for that transformation because it was fantastic.
It was pretty spectacular. The ending one particular where Criswell transforms into Christina, my jaw was on the floor. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, episode 5, I don't think we need to say too much about. Episode 6, Meet Me in Daegu. There was a couple of things I wanted to say about that I think I forgot to mention. See the scene where Tick essentially loses his virginity to Gia? I thought that, I actually was glad that scene was in there because that is something you never see. And you saw Tick be very vulnerable in that moment, and her being very much in control. And I guess all I want to say is normalise men talking about being virgins. Even though, let's be clear, the concept of virginity is ridiculous. But it's certainly the harmful aspect of how that exists in our culture certainly does not affect men as adversely as it does women, but it's a ridiculous concept regardless.
It's a thing that's brought up in TV shows and movies a lot, but not in this is fine, not in a normalised way. Look at the movie The 40-Year-Old Virgin is an entire movie about how it's weird.
Exactly. You know?
Yeah, so that was a positive aspect, and I was generally quite positive on that episode. I thought it was, I loved Jamie Chung's performance, I loved the change of scenery, and I loved that whole vibe. You know, I said before how a lot of that stuff in that episode is very much my jam. One thing, though, really bothers me about that episode that I don't think I've really went into detail when we talked about it. The whole thing about Tick shooting women in the face just for being communists, I found really triggering in a way that I think maybe I wasn't as upfront about when we talked about it before. I do find that stuff really disturbing. It disturbs me a great deal that the way in which in American culture, and I guess Western culture at large, because we all consume American culture,
kind of treats communism as a sort of other, and that anyone who has any flirtation with it is a bit of an other, just by that very... A long time ago, it became a byword for someone who was a bit strange in a way that they possibly couldn't be saved. And there's never any exploration of what communism actually is. And I don't think American popular culture has ever really reckoned with what communism actually is, and how the demonization of communism is actually an utterly horrendous phenomenon. And I think the thing that bothered me a wee bit in that episode was that was never really reckoned with. Another thing I wanted to say that's related to this, and I'm going to tie it back here in a second, I noticed that online, and when a lot of people were discussing that episode, they seemed to miss something about it, and it's something we forgot to talk about because we were kind of zipping through that episode to get to whatever we were talking about. Gia's female friend is a lesbian, and her male friend is a gay man, and I think a lot of people missed it. I think a lot of people just thought, oh, they're acting a bit weird because they're communists at the end. It's like, they were communists, but Gia's female friend obviously had romantic feelings towards Gia. And if you go back and look at the episode with that in mind, it becomes very clear. She does have this very kind of seductive look in her eyes whenever she's talking to Gia. And then at the speed dating scene, when she's talking to the guy, they find they have musicals in common. And then he's not interested in her. But the reason he's not interested in her is because he's a gay man. And it is that sort of, I mean, again, it's one of those lazy stereotypes. Of course, he's a guy who likes musicals, so draw your own conclusions. But it was a rare instance, and I think maybe why people missed it is because it's a rare instance of this show not coming out and saying a thing, and instead just showing it. But it is there. And I was aware of it when I was watching it, and I'd forgot to bring it up when we were talking about it, and it was afterwards when I was just watching it, looking online at other people's commentary, and even listened to podcasts about it. I think of all the podcasts I listened to, there was maybe one that brought it up, and I was like, did the rest of you just miss that? It seems like a lot of people missed it. But what bothers me about that, as much as I liked the fact they didn't have to go out their way to talk about it in the actual show. What bothered me about it was just another way of making these characters kind of other, but separate from them being communists. So it kind of also humanized them in a way, but the communism wasn't humanized. They had to humanize them some other way. And that, I find that a bit problematic, because surely it's bad enough that people are dying for being communists. Why is that not bad enough? You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that, don't get me wrong, having the showing what happens to other people who are, different in other ways, how they also face discrimination. Absolutely, of course, I'm glad that's in the show. But I don't understand why they couldn't also do the same and explained a bit more about what communism actually is and why someone might be communist. Because all they ever said about communism in that episode is, oh, such and such is a communist, that makes them different. And it's like, but that explains nothing about what communism is, or why it exists, or why it is a necessary force, and why it, depending on who you are, and I've declared my colours here, right? But here's my petition to centrists in the audience. If you're looking for a reason why people might feel a certain way when faced with US imperialism, which is basically what is happening in that episode, you have to surely accept there are forms of resistance that will inevitably rise. And whether you agree with communism or not, it's a perfectly legitimate ideology to follow in those circumstances. And there are reasons, perfectly reasoned arguments that could be presented in that story, and it bothers me that they did not do that. I mean, look, this show does a lot of stuff very quickly in a very cursory fashion, so I guess I was not expecting it to really introduce this conversation in any meaningful way.
Yeah.
But even an aside would have been nice. But instead, all we get about communism is, oh, these people are communists, that is why we don't like them. And it's like, that does not explain anything. There's no context to that whatsoever. It also fails to really address a certain edge to the US imperialism that is particularly unpleasant, that it can just easily other people. Any form of imperialism can easily other people
just by presenting the ideology itself as something weird and unnatural without actually explaining what it means. So, all that said, when I see Tick shooting women in the face because they are communists, and then him, as I said in our previous episode, not ever really be seen to be expressing any remorse about that, the message I get from that is that Tick has still just internalized, they were enemy, entities. Basically, they were other, they were non-human. So despite all he's gone through, there is that part of him that still exists. And so I end up still coming back to the hashtag fuck Tick.
Fuck Tick. He was just following orders.
I really find all of that weird and disturbing. And as we're going to talk about more here as we get through these next couple of episodes, but it is a feeling that intensified in me. And here's something that I did think after episode 6. I was really thinking to myself, well, obviously Misha Green and her writing staff want this character to be a bit more complex. They don't want him to be an easily likable character, and I think that still stacks up. I think that is still true. But as we're going to talk about as we get to the last couple of episodes, they still want to make him a hero. And that really fell flat for me. That attempt to make him into a hero fell completely flat for me, because they had not done this work which I think needed to be done. It wasn't about making him a good person. That's not what I was looking for. It was about making him more nuanced than what they had tried to do in the guise of making him nuanced.
Yeah, they gave him a past that was, to my mind, basically irredeemable. So when they tried to have some sort of redemption arc, it failed miserably, to my mind. Like, when he died, I was like, oh, yes, cool, nice one, Tick's dead, fuck him. Like, sort of spoiler alert. But yeah,
Spoiler class.
I would have been happy enough if he had died 2 episodes earlier.
I think we said as much in a previous episode.
Yeah.
I think I went as far as to say I hope Letty kills him.
But there was also, I know I'm jumping ahead to the finale here, which we'll come to in a bit, guys. But for me, I mean, his death, showing everyone's like sorrow over his death, it had no emotional punch for me. Not even Michael K. Williams' emotion over his son's death carried any weight for me, because I was like, but your son was a dick.
I disagree slightly. I did feel an emotional weight for that. I felt Montrose's pain, but it did not make me feel sad, particularly that Tick was dead. I don't really care that Tick's dead, but I do feel bad that Montrose was distraught, and I shouldn't, because Montrose was also a highly problematic character. I think, though, if there's a difference between the way those two characters were portrayed in terms of how nuanced and how problematic each of them was, Montrose did a horrendous thing in episode 4, which I never forgave him for, and I still don't forgive him for. And it's not about forgiving Montrose, it's about understanding why he did the things he did, understanding what made him the way he was. And I think the show did a better job of that with Montrose than it ever did with Tick. And considering Tick was supposed to be the main character, I feel like they really dropped a bollock there. Anyway, I think that's about all I wanted to say about episode 6. So episode 7 is where you and I both agreed that, oh my god, this show suddenly took a real positive upswing.
Oh yeah.
That episode was phenomenal, and I think we said in our previous podcast that I know I certainly said that is not something I ever expected or thought I wanted from this show. But a few minutes into it, I was just like, you know what, whatever, just bring it on. It was such a really rich, very Afrofuturist, very feminist exploration of all these different pulp fiction ideas, with hints of, there was all this stuff dashed in there about very particular moments in Black history, very particular figures. You have Josephine Baker in there. That whole thing was incredible. Like Hippolyta on stage in Paris with Josephine Baker. All of that stuff was incredible. And the eagle-eyed will have spotted, I don't know if you spotted, but Frida Kahlo was in there at one point, because Josephine Baker and
Frida Kahlo did have a love affair at one point.
That episode was Cindy Mayweather presents Jules Verne's Black History sci-fi opera, and it was fucking great for it.
Yeah, pretty much. And it was not what I thought I was getting into when this show started, but it was one of the best things I ended up getting from it. For anybody who's not familiar with who Josephine Baker is, if you've watched the show, you probably were curious enough to look it up, but in case you haven't, she's an incredibly important figure, a really fascinating figure. She lived a lot of her life in Europe, and at the time of World War II, she was still living in France at that time, and she was actually very active in the French resistance. She lived an incredible life, just a hugely important cultural figure, a real trailblazer. She's one of those people that, how do you fit all that into one life? You know, it's pretty incredible. And then she was kind of quite involved in the civil rights movement in the 60s as well. Very important figure in Black history, and I really enjoyed everything they did with that. I thought the actress who played her was perfect. I thought the resemblance was just enough, and the way that actress played that role was really quite superb. A lot of the dialogue was very mannered in the way that here, nudge, wink, obviously this is a reference to this is a reference to that. The dialogue's full of it, but that was fine in the context of that episode where we were on that odyssey and we knew right from the start that was the journey we were on. I was completely accepting of that kind of thing within the context of that episode in a way which maybe I was less tolerant of in other episodes that did not quite have as strong a framework to make it work.
No, yeah, absolutely. It took a lot of the weaknesses of previous episodes and sort of used them as a strength.
Yeah, I agree.
Where it didn't show what happened to Tick and didn't tell. Tick's been away, Tick's come back. We'll drop a couple of clues in the next episode about what happened, but fuck Tick, you don't need to see his journey.
Yeah, it was a real standout episode, and I tell you something, that's an episode I will certainly revisit. I could just watch that on its own as a piece in its own right and not really need to have any relation to the rest of the series. It does exist kind of on its own. It was a beautiful piece of work. I loved pretty much everything about it.
It's the only episode that I haven't deleted after download.
Definitely worth keeping. So yeah, I don't want to say too much more about it because we did cover it in our previous episode, and I don't want to just repeat everything I said. But if you missed our previous podcast, listeners, go back and listen, because I did speak very enthusiastically about that episode. We both did, so there is more to say about it, but we already said it. All right, so episode 8. I think we kind of glossed over this one a wee bit. I was mainly talking about the Topsy and Bopsy of it all, so I'm not going to focus on that too much here. I just want to say I did really appreciate about this episode the way it really focused on there was a lot of the suburban horror genre going on. I noticed there was some very nice nods to Halloween, for example, when Dee is following Letty out of the house, trying to tell her that she's being followed by Topsy and Bopsy. The way those shots are framed when Letty stands on the sidewalk, or it's a pavement as we call it, it was straight out of Halloween. And the way Letty is looking back and forth along the pavement, and you see those long roads that they have in the States that we don't quite have here. The way all that was framed, I was just expecting Michael Myers to pop out from behind a bush, you know.
Yeah.
The nods were really clear, and I was like, nah, I'm digging this. This is quite good. There was also the kind of the Freddy Krueger of it all. We see the wee white girls skipping rope and singing a song.
Topsy with her yellow eyes tries to claw the one she spies, follows them from tree to brook, over under every nook. Topsy has the wildest do, she just wants to dance with you.
Yeah, so it's great stuff. And the way it was delivered, it was entirely a nod to the Freddy Krueger rhyme from Nightmare on Elm Street.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
3, 4, 3. Better lock your door.
5, 6, get a crucifix.
7, 8, don't stay up late. 9, 10, never sleep again.
Yeah, it's one of those things that is probably impaled in a certain generation's mind that we can all just say the Freddy Krueger rhyme without thinking too hard about it.
Yeah. So I really enjoyed that. Those little nods I all thought were really perfect. We did mention this. That episode was directed by Misha Green. It's the only episode she directed, and it's the only anything she's ever directed. I want to mention that again because that episode is really solidly put together. I don't think all of it is successful, but her directorial skill on the episode, I think, by and large, is really quite solid. And there's like every episode in this show, there's so much going on. I mean, there's too much going on in every episode. But she does
a good job of tackling, even if they don't quite come together in a cohesive whole, she does a good job of tackling each of the facets involved in that story. So yeah, she's definitely got directorial skill.
Especially the fact that she chose, obviously, to direct her directorial debut to be an episode that has quite a over-the-top action scene, which must be one of the most difficult things to direct, I would assume, as a director.
Definitely. I think that's a bold choice. And that whole scene at the end with the Black Shoggoth, just taking out scores of KKK cops, that's so well put together. That was such a great ending scene. Yeah, it was cathartic, and the way every shot was framed was just the way that the choreography of the Shoggoth's rampage over the cars and the bodies flying through the air, everything was just about right, you know. It was really well put together.
And whoever they got to train that Shoggoth did an incredible job.
Good job, Shoggoth Wrangler. Yeah. Shrangler.
You ever heard the old expression from Hollywood, never work with children or Shoggoths?
So other notes about this episode. The whole thing really was about Dee and the fact that she had been kind of abandoned. And the adults were all... The previous couple of episodes prior to this, and we had talked about it as well when we were not on the podcast, but before we had recorded it, when we were talking to each other about it, it does seem like we were becoming less interested in the main characters by this point, because they were all a bit self-absorbed and they were all a bit selfish, and we were getting a bit tired of them.
Yep.
And so I was quite relieved that Dee had her own episode, even though it wasn't entirely focused on her. We got enough of her that she kind of drove the main part of the story. But the problem with that is, where I feel the show sort of kind of dropped the ball again there, is that's a point where maybe there should have been something make us a wee bit more sympathetic to the main characters again at that point. Instead, what it achieved was alienating us from them further, because it became clear that none of this is Dee's fault. She should not be having to go through this. And she's in that classic horror movie position of she's trying to her best to explain to people what's happening, and none of the adults are hearing a damn thing. It's like, oh, you crazy kids. You know, it's that old trope. And it's like, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, which, given what they've been going through themselves,
right, exactly.
You would think they would be... I think it goes back to a thing I said about Tick not believing Letty about the haunted house initially.
Yes.
Like, not only have you just seen magic, but did you not also fuck a demon in South Korea?
Selective memory, that Tick.
Maybe you should believe someone has a haunted house, and you'd think, like, you know, the central cast, or like, not cast, but the central characters of the show should maybe have been a bit more sympathetic when Dee was telling them that she was being stalked by, you know, spirits or demons, that they might stop and go, you probably are, because there's a lot of like weird dark magic going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that part really tried my patience in terms of my relationship with the main characters at that point. I was like, for fuck's sake, at least one of you show some concern here. Yeah, it was bizarre. And I even looking back now, I feel like it was a bad decision to get down that route. I think Montrose is the only one who expresses any kind of concern, but even he is a bit kind of blinkered. Like it seems like he's not really paying attention to what's actually happening. Yeah, I thought this that late in the season. I thought that was a bad decision, but it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
This was also the episode that gave us Christina's pseudo-lynching in response to, presumably in response to what Ruby told her about what happened to Emmett Till. By the way, if you've not heard the previous episode, we did say more about Emmett Till's funeral. I'm not going to repeat all that, because if I keep repeating myself, we'll be here forever. But I want to say more about that scene, though, because the more I think about it now, in the context I haven't seen the finale, I'm still utterly perplexed as to why that scene was in there. What purpose did that actually serve? Because we ultimately learn, really, in the end, that nothing really matters to Christina beyond her goal for immortality, which I thought was a real disappointment, personally. They had the opportunity to deepen her character a wee bit, and they decided in the end to not bother. And I suppose the other thing is, even if this had been... Well, here's the thing, right? I'll just get to the crux of it. This is a problematic scene no matter what they were trying to do with it. Because I think, as I said in the previous episode, Christina's not in anything like the same position as Emmett Till was in, because Christina's entirely in control of this scenario. That's not remotely the same experience of a young child being, lynched and subjected to abuse and all kinds of horrific violence that they, have no part in. It's not remotely the same thing. So I don't get, why is this even in here? I'm really struggling to think why they thought this was a good idea. Also, it seems like when Christina sees her, when she gets out the water and her invulnerability has kicked in, she kind of laughs, and I'm like, why are they making her laugh? What is this scene trying to say? I mean, if it's just trying to say the thing that I joked about in the previous episode, about the old analogy about white feminism taking black trauma and making it all about themselves, I don't think that's a good enough reason to have that scene in there. If anything, I think it's making a very serious subject into a kind of throwaway. It's almost treating this subject as throwaway as Christina is treating it in this moment. I just don't understand what the meaning or the intention of it was now that I've seen. I guess I was expecting the finale to contextualise it a wee bit more, and it has not done that.
I expected there to be a little more growth with Christina's character, especially in relation to her relationship with Ruby. Mm-hmm. And the final episode hinted at it a little, like
it did.
Maybe.
Yep.
And the lynching scene, as you said, if you look at it in two different ways, it's problematic. If you look at it from like a third viewpoint where, it's just a way to show a woman being like tortured, lynched and drowned as well, just on a pure surface, this is what's happening level, it's also still shitty and horrible.
Yeah, nothing about it's good, no matter what interpretation you try and make with that. None of it is good.
I file that under HB bra moment, of which this series has several.
Yeah. I think also this was the episode where it really kicked in for me, although it had been bubbling away for several episodes prior. The supporting characters in this show are way more interesting than the main characters. And that was not helped by the fact that we did have several episodes prior to this one where we were not really following the main characters. And so there is this, right in the centre of the season, there's this a patch of a few episodes where we are not spending as much time with our main cast. I think that was a bad decision. And I know we have, I talked about this endlessly in our previous podcast about this show, but this idea where they're trying to create a different genre with each episode and a different structure with each episode, sometimes it works. Like episode 7, it really worked. But overall, for me, I still come away from this show saying, well, that actually worked to the detriment of the show as a whole, because it really made me lose touch with the main cast. And so when we got back to them by this point in episode 8, we were starting to spend a bit more time with them. I did not want to spend more time with them. I was kind of annoyed with all of them. I really wanted to spend more time with Dee in this episode. She was the character I was invested in at this point. And also Hippolyta, whom we did not see in this episode because she did not appear again until episode 9. I was like, where the fuck is Hippolyta? Her kid is in serious danger. Where is she? And I was just starting to resent everybody at this point, which I think maybe there was a part of me was like, maybe that was intentional, but I don't know. Even if it was intentional, again, I don't know that it paid off properly.
So neither of us, as we've mentioned before, have read the novel.
Mm-hmm.
But we do know, I guess, from looking stuff up, that a lot of the TV show, while it's based on the novel, a lot of it is an invention of the writers themselves. Like, they've expanded on ideas or run with them. I'm not sure how many of the characters are inventions of the writers, but I wonder if, in inventing certain characters, if the writers of the show were maybe a bit more in love with their own creations than the source material, and let a lot of the main source material fall to the side. Yeah,
that's a good observation. That's quite possible. I don't know either. As far as I know, as far as the main cast goes, they are all present in the novel, but there are changes to a lot of the. Like I said before, Letty is much more religious in the novel. And we see her coming back to religion a bit in the last couple of episodes, but apparently in the novel she's like very seriously, zealously Christian. There are some gender swaps as well. Like the character of Dee is a boy called Horace, so that character is in there, but there's a gender swap, so there's obviously a different chemistry going on there in terms of how it relates to the story.
Yeah, I don't know though. It's a good point. I guess in my mind, if you gender swap a character, you are making an entirely different character because the way they navigate the world is going to be completely different. So I can't say this with any authority, having not read the book. But for me, I would say it's inevitable that Dee has to be a different character from Horace. And obviously, the set piece here with Topsy and Bopsy, that's entirely an invention of Misha Green and her writers. So, yeah, there are moments here where I think you're probably quite right. There probably are lots of moments in this show where the little changes they made gradually became far bigger changes because they became way more invested in them as they were going along. And I think that's natural. And I think there's a way that could have worked. But as we've said many times with this show, I think one of the biggest problems with it is there is so much going on in this show and so little time in which to do it. And the whole thing just moves so fast that a lot of this crucial bedrock stuff just ends up being glossed over in a way. And I don't think that helps that scenario. Okay, so moving back on to episode 9, which we did talk about a wee bit last week. But given that last time we spoke, James, I was doing my best to get to the Fargo chat.
Yeah, I think we started to rush at that point as we realised we were approaching the 2-hour mark and hadn't yet started talking about
We realised
Fargo.
we were on the 3rd day of recording.
Speaking of which, guys, genuinely, we will get Fargo shortly because we have more Fargo to talk about this episode.
We do. And it is coming, don't worry. I put in your chapter markers, so if you want to go straight to that, just go straight to it. Also, the Hamiltron can help you out.
Before we continue to talk about episode 9,
mm-hmm.
So you know how the episode description for the previous episode is done in the style of Billy Joel's "We Didn't Start the Fire."
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to put all the things that we were talking about in the episode into the cadence and the rhythm of "We Didn't Start the Fire," but it kept turning into like the middle 8 or like the bridge of "Liar" by Megadeth.
That's a thin line.
Just thought I'd bring that up there for our Peace Sells But Who's Buying fans.
Good shit.
Or was that on So Far So Good So What?
James, is this an episode of fSobriety?
No. So talking about so back to episode 9 of Lovecraft Country.
Alright, so we did talk about this.
Stay on topic.
Stay on target. Yeah, so we did go over this, but there's stuff in the episode that I did not talk about because I think A, we were trying to rush through it to get to Fargo, and B, I was also trying my best to be as positive as possible, and there was stuff in that episode I did really like, and so that's what I focused on. However, I did have some problems with it that I did not get into, and given how the finale has turned out, I think it's important to mention some of this stuff now. This whole time travel thing. Now, you know time travel is my jam, James. So ordinarily I get very excited at any time travel story, particularly ones that do actually deal with, or in some way reference, actual real-life historical events that I'm interested in. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot in here that I did enjoy, but there was stuff in here that I wanted to enjoy way more than I did, and there was stuff that I just downright thought, no, just no. First of all, right, I do think the time travel stuff was a bit underwhelming in its execution. I'll get to why in a second, right, but it all stems from there's a certain short-handedness in the way all of this was handled, which, you know, I should have expected given how this show has panned out prior to this. The whole thing about going to retrieve the Book of Names, first of all, the Book of Names was built up all the way through this season as a major phenomenon, but when I say built up, I mean, it was mentioned many times.
Yes.
And there was very little work done to really solidify what the Book of Names really was. And I was having real difficulty. Even at this point, the penultimate episode, and I do remember consciously thinking to myself, why am I so unconcerned about this thing that's supposed to be the major crux of this endgame in the story? And it's because the show really has not done that great a job of selling the Book of Names to me. It's really not communicated to me what the Book of Names really is. I mean, I get the concept of it. There's no meat on the bone, though.
More like the Book of MacGuffins.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can put a canned laughter in there. That was becoming really apparent in this episode. I was like,
This episode, the writing of it really just wants us to be sold on the idea that this is important and that we should understand what this means. But I spent most of this episode not really caring about the Book of Names. That is not where my interest lay. And for that reason, I think maybe I was possibly more aware of the flaws outside of that mission than I otherwise would be had I been a bit more convinced by it. So here's where I had some real problems. First of all, the characters' flaws really became a drag at this point, because we are now in the penultimate episode of this show. Why am I still so annoyed with these characters? It's like, please do something to make me sympathise with these characters a bit more. I just mean individually. Like, Tick is just constantly having a tantrum in this episode. It's like, mate, just fuck up. It's like, every single thing in his mouth is like, mate, just shut the fuck up, man.
Sorry, I love a good fuck up.
This is another example where I started having more sympathy for Montrose than I did for Tick. And we know Montrose, has done monstrous things. But I was like, this guy he's in full-blown PTSD, and Tick is just constantly up his ass. And I'm like, fucking give him a break, man. It's like, you literally took him back in time to the most traumatic moment in his entire life. Like, fucking give him a break for a second. It was just annoying me so much. And I get it, like, that's how drama is done. I understand the concept of upping the drama. But at this point, this was not actually doing anything for the drama. It was just simply making me dislike Tick even more. Hashtag fuck Tick. And considering the other character is a murderer, that should not be the case. Yeah, I found that most of these scenes between the two of them really frustrating. So I did not particularly like that what could have been a great story about time travel and about the ins and outs of the Tulsa Massacre became more just Tick being an arsehole. I felt there was a lot of wasted opportunity there. The stuff with Letty I enjoyed a lot more. I thought was a lot more interesting. However, I would not say that was perfect either, for a couple of important reasons, which I'm about to get to. But before I do, here's one of the things as a time travel aficionado, here's one of the things I did not particularly like about this episode. Time travel in fiction is one of those things where there are so many different interpretations of how time travel works that I feel that the storytellers have a duty to explain the rules of time travel, at least as it applies to the particular story they're telling. Because otherwise, the viewers just kind of lost, the audience is kind of lost with what the rules are. And what I particularly had a problem with this episode is that the implied rules that they eventually came up with seemed like, well, surely you could have just subverted those rules. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. One of the first parts of it, though, is over the course of the episode, they basically learned that they've done this already. Because we know that Tick went back in time. That's eventually is revealed to us what happened. As I predicted, Tick was the Jackie Robinson of it all. And we know that the Book of Names went missing at that time. Well, it went missing because Letty went back and took it. So these things already happened. So that means all of this is preordained, right?
To quote Battlestar Galactica, the reboot, not the original 1970s camp series, all of this has happened before and all of this will happen again.
Right. But here's the thing. Given that Hippolyta is such a cosmic multiverse inhabiting being, why can't she send them to a multiverse version? Why do they have to do all this again? Why are they locked into this pattern? Because if Hippolyta has that power that they can just explore a parallel reality where they can both save the people in Tulsa and still complete their mission, why did Misha Green and her writing team even entertain that as a possibility? I really find that weird. And I find it especially weird for a show that is supposedly trying to subvert some of the tropes. You know, okay, here's the thing, right? The whole Tulsa Massacre thing, this is one of the most horrific episodes in Black history. These characters actually have the power to go in and influence how that transpires. They have the ability to change it in some way. And instead, they spend the entire episode concerned with themselves, ultimately. And I find that a really weird decision on the part of the writers to include this episode in history as part of the story and not actually have the characters even consider
that they might be able to change the course of history. That seems like a major, major drop of the ball.
Yeah.
Because you might argue, well, maybe, okay, there are only 3 people, what can they do? Fine, okay, but there's ways that you can tell the story from that point. They can start to think about, well, what can we achieve? What's the small thing we can achieve that might make a big difference? But that doesn't even come into it. They just don't even have that conversation. It seems not to even enter into their minds, which I find truly, truly bizarre. They have it confirmed literally right in front of them that they've done all of this. So why not do it differently and attempt to achieve something larger? That's really fucking weird that was not a possibility that was at least mooted at some point in the conversation. I don't get it, man, and it's been bothering me ever since I watched that episode. At least mention it, the possibility, but it's just not even mentioned. And
I know that this is tropey as hell, right? But, you know, a lot of like the best time travel stories have that. There's a character who's like, no, we can fix this all, and the rest are like, oh, wait, you can't change the past. No one was thinking, we can fix this. You know?
No.
Everyone was like, we'll get the book. Stuff. Come on, Montrose, snap out of it. You know, grow up.
Get over your PTSD and get with the program. The program is we save ourselves and fuck history. It's like, what? I mean, really, when you think about it in that context, it's kind of unpleasant. The characters immediately become way more self-absorbed than they already were. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I really had a major problem with this. I was really biting my tongue in our previous episodes because I did want to get into this, but get off my chest now. Yeah, I struggled with that a lot all the way through the episode. I was like, somebody's got to say something at some point about this, surely. But it just never even came up. Now, this is the hashtag plug section. In my current project that I'm writing, Codex Expeditions, this
available
actually,
where all good books will be sold in the future.
In the future, if we have a future. This is a concept that does come up. I'm not going to get into too much detail how, but there is a character whose mission, or philosophical mission, if not a literal one, becomes what if you could unfuck the future by unfucking the past, as they put it. You might be able to guess which character says that. And one of the major themes for me right away with coming up with that is, well, there is a responsibility in a way that if you have the access to actually manipulate time and space, to be able to travel as you see fit, there's a responsibility, there's a duty to even think, well, how can I change things for the better? How could I prevent something terrible that's so awful from happening? Surely it's natural to think about that unless you are so fucking self-absorbed that... this is just what I just struggled with this so much, because any sympathy I was having with these characters, a large part of it was lost at this point, because I was like, if you were actually to somehow challenge the course of history at this point, surely that's a bigger mission and a bigger goal, even for you personally, because you could end up creating a whole new timeline where none of what's happened to you in the course of this mission would ever need to happen. You wouldn't have to be on this road. Why did they not think of this? Why is it that they've just accepted that this fucking madcap hell ride through haunted houses and mad cults and fucking shoggoths and whatnot, that's the only fucking route their lives could possibly follow? Why did it not occur to them that, well, if we change history, maybe everything can change? I mean, I hate to use the word, but duh. Also, with Montrose's character, I loved a lot of that stuff. That, for me, was maybe the most affecting stuff, because the whole idea of a person going back and revisiting their own trauma is a really powerful idea. And there was a lot of pathos there. And, of course, M.K. Williams doing amazing work.
Doing God's work.
But, yeah, ultimately, that drop of the bollock, I felt, ultimately points to something at the heart of this show that's, if not outright reactionary, because I don't think it is, but at least very, very timid with its own ambitions. I mean, I guess if I could say something positive about what they did with this, they answered the question, what if Watchmen were actually Quantum Leap? A question that did not need to be asked, and nor was ever a question. But it does go back to the other question about why the fuck they went back to this specific time, which I brought up in our previous podcast. What was Hippolyta thinking by putting them back right at that point in time? Why not, like,
a few months earlier. I mean, Hippolyta clearly has that power, doesn't she? I mean, they really oversold just how powerful Hippolyta was supposed to be, and yet she seemed to have no control over the fact that for some weird reason they had to go to this very specific moment in time. There was no rationale given for not being able to save more people in Tulsa. There was no rationale given for them not being able to go back further in time to even prevent the massacre or to have warned people about the massacre. And the fact that they did not even give us an explanation as to why, I think it's a wee bit unforgivable. There's just something weirdly short-sighted about using that massive historical event as a prop to merely forward these characters' much more individualistic plot.
All it is just using like a massive horrific tragedy as set dressing, you know. I mean, sure, maybe there's the idea that people do need to know that and to be reminded that that happened, because as I think I've mentioned before, the first time I saw Watchmen, I had no idea the Tulsa Massacre was a real historical event.
Yeah,
and as we've discussed before, I was not
Yeah.
alone in that. So maybe it's just like a keep putting it in there, keep putting it in there. But on the other hand, yeah, if it's a fantastical show and there's time travel, involve it more, make it something that, you know, that will affect the characters, not just Montrose. But in terms of the rules of time travel, I always feel very strongly about this. Whenever time travel is used in anything, the rules aren't specifically set out for. There should be a disclaimer comes up at the bottom of the screen that just says, stop, watch primer, continue.
Right, yeah, that's good advice, regardless. Yeah, it's one of the best time travel narratives on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in our previous podcast, I did say that I felt this was, on some level, it was actually a better representation of the Tulsa Massacre than the one in Watchmen. I want to clarify what I meant by that, only because we saw more of it, and I think it did some bold things. And to be fair to Lovecraft Country, it did do some bold things in the way it did actually show you the real scale of just how horrific that event was. And we did get to see more of the ground floor. You know, we were there with people. We actually, you know, got to see the worst happen to some of these characters, and it was quite harrowing. And on that level, it did its job. I mean, that stuff, I'm glad that stuff is in there. The major difference, though, however, is that Watchmen at least utilised that whole event to inform the rest of its story. That actually made its story richer, and it informs the reality of the characters in the future. Whereas Lovecraft Country really just treat it ultimately more as a backdrop, as you said, a kind of just part of the macabre fairground ride towards the season finale. It's basically more horror for the sake of more horror, and the fact that it is referencing something real, I give Misha Green and her writing crew the benefit of the doubt by saying that they do have a genuine concern with the way they portray this stuff and with wanting to get some sense of realism, some sense of the history imbued into this story. But like so much on this show, I just don't feel that there was enough meat on the bone for it to actually really make any impact beyond just, well, that was horrible, you know? And that's a problem with this show generally. And the Emmett Till thing, I think you can kind of say the same, although I think that was a bit more effective because at least it did affect at least one of the characters' lives in a major way. Whereas this, I feel like the characters go to the past, they do a thing, they come back to the present, and the past is the past. Whereas with Watchmen, the way it treated the Tulsa Massacre was still very much present for these characters, and you really got a sense of that in Watchmen. So I would say that would be the difference. So yeah, another very frustrating watch this episode, but with great moments, which is something that I seem to say a lot about this show. Another thing I did not like about episode 9, Gia was weirdly sidelined, and I was worried that she was not even going to come back. And I was thinking to myself, did she just turn up just so Tick could shout at her?
Yeah,
and
was Jamie Chung contractually obliged to be there for like what?
But it did strike me that she might have been useful in this episode. Why did they not take her back to Tulsa? You know what I mean? Why does she not go back and just start, you know, skewering KKK assholes with her tentacles, eyeball tentacles or whatever? Would probably have been more use than Montrose, who just spent the whole time in the throes of PTSD. All right, shall we move into the finale?
That brings us to the I'm not gonna lampshade it. I lampshaded it at the start of this episode. To the finale. Not the worst episode of television I've ever watched.
No, that's fair.
I'm trying to be positive here.
I'm going to coin my feelings on this finale by saying it is basically a perfect microcosm of the season as a whole. Because there is great stuff in here. There's some brilliant ideas in here. There are amazing performances. There's fantastic production design. All of the things that make this show great when it's great were all present and correct in this episode. But all of the things that make this show fall flat on its face were also very much present in this episode. And each were there in about equal measure. I'll start with the simple stuff, right? And this has been a major bugbear of mine through this whole show. The pacing and the structure. There's at least 3 episodes worth of material in this final episode. Because so much of what, like the whole Tick and Letty stuff, doing the spells where they summon Titus Braithwaite, that should have been its own episode. And that whole scene where they summon him and he appears in front of Christina and Christina crashes, then Tick takes him out, that should have been the ending to probably the penultimate episode. And then the next episode should have been the whole build up to the ritual. That would have made way more sense. This felt like at least 2, arguably 3 different episodes crammed into 60 minutes.
Do you know something? This had the same problem but in a different way that the penultimate episode of Dark had. Whereas this second last episode of Dark, would have loved to have seen that be 3 or 4 episodes. Whereas this, it was like, I mean, it could have been 3 or 4 episodes, but would I rather they just fucking put it all into one and got it over with?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, and I'm always wary about saying this with this show because I'm worried it always sounds like I'm just hating on the show. I'm not. Listen, I would not have stuck with the show and talked about it as much as we've talked about it if I just absolutely hated the show. There is stuff about this show I really, really like, but my God, it does not make it easy. It's just some of it is just so frustrating. The cast were all on form this episode, every single one of them. By the way, Jonathan Majors he did his absolute best to make me sympathise with Tick in this episode. I did not quite, but he did his best to get me there, and it's the most convinced I've been. I think the moment where he's speaking with his mother, I did find that scene actually quite emotionally affecting, and when he openly says, "I don't want to die," I did find that quite affecting. I think though, and again this is related to what I was just saying, there's a problem though with how that was staged, because it was also intercut with Letty's conversation with Hattie, and all of it was couched in this whole the ancestors know better and this is how it's going down kind of thing. So there was this kind of fatalistic aspect to it which really undercut any sense of drama. And it also made everything was a bit staid, a bit sort of, the drama got kind of muted by the fact that no, this is happening sort of thing. And again, if this had been allowed to breathe over the space of a full episode, I don't think I would have felt that quite as much. But because it was just this one scene, and like everything on this show, it just seemed to suddenly trundle by exceptionally quickly, I was like, okay then, I guess that's what's happening. I mean, the idea that it is fatalistic, I don't necessarily have a problem with. In a sense, that's, you know, it's part and parcel of existentialism, which is something I normally quite enjoy, as long as it has a sense of humour. So not True Detective. More Fargo, less True Detective. We'll get to Fargo in a minute, guys. So it really is. It's a structure problem and it's a pacing problem, and I think this episode, as a microcosm of the show, really did prove once and for all there's just too much potential material in this show and nowhere near enough time. I mean, if you think back to episodes 1 and 2, see those first 2 episodes, you could easily make a season of TV out of those first 2 episodes. You could have the bulk of that season be a 10-hour road movie, and really flesh out the characters, really flesh out the lore and the mythology, really flesh out the reality of that time and place and the threat of the racism. And I maintain that scene, that chase scene in episode 1, is easily the most disturbing thing in this entire show.
The slow car chase.
Yeah, and I wish there had been more of that kind of thing. So this is my own fantasy. It's for a TV show that will never be made, but you could easily take those first 2 episodes and make a whole season. Likewise, you could easily make an entire season set in Tulsa in 1921 and just have the characters live their daily lives, you know, as refugees from the 1950s, and the whole season could build up to the Tulsa Massacre. That would be an amazing season of television. There's so much rich potential in this material.
Yep, likewise, you could have a full 10-hour season of Hippolyta's interdimensional god journeys.
Absolutely.
I would watch that show.
I would absolutely watch that. Commission that, please, HBO. There's so much rich potential in the material in this show, and just none of it really given its chance to live properly.
A lot of the show, I think specifically the last episode, the way the last episode was paced reminded me of an excitable person telling someone what happened in a show. Like, okay, and then this and then this happened, and then this happened. Oh yeah, and then this happened. Oh yeah, and then they did this, but like in real time with the scenes.
Yeah, that's actually a good analogy. It is a lot like that. I will say this as well. It's really when the pace is this frenetic. Maybe this is maybe a partly a flaw of mine as well. But see the first half of this episode. See you looking back on it now. I honestly can't tell you what happened in most of it, because I did start to zone out quite a bit, and it's because stuff was just happening so quickly, and I was like, oh God, like, just fucking slow down and give me a chance to get involved in what is happening. But it just, once again, just became a procession of mad shit unfolding on the screen, and I was like, right, I'll zone back in, like subconsciously I'm like, I'll zone back in when there's a quieter moment, and I'll get my thoughts together about what's happened. And that's what happened. I mean, by the time they went on their road trip and they're singing Shaboom in the car, which I think was my Eye of the Duck of the episode.
What do you mean, Eye of the Duck, Craig?
I'll let David Lynch explain.
You know, nature can teach us a lot of things. In painting, you're working within a certain shaped canvas. And there's many things that one does intuitively to move the eye. There's repetition of shape, repetition of color. But when you start looking at a duck, you see your eye is moving in a certain way, and you start wondering about a duck, what it can teach us about any kind of abstract painting or proportions or even sequences, scenes. And it always is interesting that the eye is in the perfect place. I believe every film has the eye of the duck scene, but it can fool you.
So that was my Eye of the Duck in the episode, and that's where I landed back in it. That's where I was like, okay, I'm back with these characters again. Some good stuff's happening. Let's go. And most of what happened with Titus Braithwaite and that whole thing with him being summoned and Christina's crash, on some level it was quite fun to watch, but I did not feel involved in it, and that's a big problem for me with this show. At its most frenetic, I start to feel completely uninvolved in it.
Now, I mentioned earlier that I had, perhaps foolishly, perhaps it says more about me than the show, but I had started to ship Ruby and Christina a bit. But there was that whole exchange between Ruby and Letty about what family really means. Mm-hmm. And I thought it had some nice touches, but it was also kind of lame, because it was like, it started on, I don't know, but we're family, and then it was like, are we family? Because it's family not the family you choose. And then in the end it was like, no, it's not. Family is the thing you're blood related to. I
did feel there was a definite bait and switch there, which, I did find a wee bit underwhelming.
I know the you find your own family thing is a trope, but it's a nice trope.
It's also completely true, or at least for me. I mean, that's something that always rings true for me. The whole obsession with blood family is just always a bit weird for me. Like, it's cool if you're close with your family, but it can be quite a toxic thing to subscribe to, like when you feel compelled to do it because you feel you're supposed to, for a lot of people who are trapped when they have toxic family members. So I'm always a bit suspicious of it, and I never really appreciate it properly when it's really hammered home in drama like this.
And the villain of the piece, as it turned out, being Christina, was very much, fuck my family, I'm gonna, admittedly they said that.
So obviously she's a wrong one.
Yeah. But then they were like, but also she doesn't care about anything apart from immortality.
Right. Yeah.
But there was that moment where it seemed like she was like, oh, I'm going to find my own family, and I guess Ruby's that family. And then they were like, no, family is your sister and your brother-in-law, I guess. And Having said that, I did enjoy parts of it. It's easy for me to come off as sounding uber negative about this show because I'm a negative person.
You are, as Kurt Cobain said, a negative creep. Yeah, there was great stuff in this still. I mean, the chemistry between the characters when it was allowed to breathe was always great. And that was, again, that was true of the show as a whole. And again, it's true to say there just was not enough of it. This needed to be at least 2 hours long, this episode. So the whole gang travelling towards the scene of the ritual. I have to say, though, I even now, I'm still a bit unsure as to why everybody had to go. Did that make sense? Did that make sense to you? I wasn't quite feeling.
They'd signed on for 10 episodes and they were like, I mean, fuck it, I guess you're in the car.
I mean, I'm glad Gia was there and she got actually something to do towards the end, which I'm going to mention in a bit. But yeah, I wasn't entirely sure why the whole gang needed to be there, including Dee. I was like, is that a good idea to take Dee along? Although, mind you, they have left her behind and completely ignored her so many times in the previous few episodes, and I guess they owe it to her to take her along. On that subject, Dee spends the first half of this episode freaking out about her Groot arm. And I was feeling really, really bad for Dee. And once again, it was like she was just in her own private hell with all this other stuff going on around her that was not directly involving her. But Hippolyta basically gives her a robot arm. Let's just go skip straight to the end. Hippolyta gives her a robot arm. Dee officially becomes Misty Knight. Of course, we don't realise that until the end of the episode, but at this point in the road trip, she's got that robot arm under there covered up. This is out of sequence, but I'm going to mention it here. Towards the end of the episode, we got all those very brief flashes of what's happened in between, which, you know, is a classic case of this show really just ramming in information wherever it can. And you get that flash of Tick basically handing the Black Shoggoth over to Dee. Mm-hmm. So the Black Shoggoth is now her pet, essentially. We also get that flash of Ruby lying in the bed, and who knows whether she's dead or in a coma, because I do feel, as much as Christina yammered on about it for a long portion of this show, I still am not 100% clear of what the science is and how that works, whether that means Ruby is dead. So I don't know. All I know is I cannot believe the show did Ruby dirty like that by just disposing of her off screen. I really feel that was a bad decision. Let's talk about that, actually. When Ruby, who is actually Christina, Ruptina, if you will, and they're both up on that tower, and Ruptina says what she does. See, prior to that, did you twig that was Christina?
I didn't.
See, I suspected it was, but I suspected it was when she turned up. But by the time they got to the tower, I was like, I'd sort of like, nah. But then, of course, there was the really obvious line. And then Letty does the whole thing. Oh, I'm glad you agreed to come along when I met you at the cemetery. Like, it's not a line anybody would ever say in real life.
Although we have seen these characters say stuff like that. So
yeah.
Hey, remember back when, etc., etc.
I remember one of my problems early in the season was the expositional dialogue in this show, and this was almost if this had been done with a self-knowing nudge and wink, it would have been hilarious. But instead, I was just like, oh god, really?
I'm going to give Misha Green the benefit of the doubt here and say that all the expositional dialogue was just like a build-up to so that they could work that moment in and have it not seem totally out of the blue.
Here's another thing. This mob that turns up, like straight from Frankenstein with pitchforks and flaming torches.
Yeah.
I feel like we've not really... I guess this was supposed to be the villagers that we saw back in episode 2, but the optics of it were just so weird. They just seemed to appear out of nowhere, and I was like... Oh, okay, alright then.
It was pretty fucking weird, not gonna lie.
The characters do a not so great job of standing up for themselves, and everybody gets captured within a couple of minutes, and I was like, this is becoming there's a real flattening of the excitement at this point. At that point in the episode, were you 100% sure that Tick was going to die?
I wasn't. I thought they were maybe going to bring it back.
I figured they might as well, yeah, but they ended up not doing that, and I guess I'm kind of glad they went that route. I was expecting there to be some magic bullet somewhere along the way. Okay, let's talk about this scene then, where the actual ritual itself, this was pretty unpleasant. This, when Christina slashes open Tick's arms, like on the one hand it was a kind of ludicrous amount of blood, but on the other hand I was like, yeah, no, that's just about disturbing enough that I'm having trouble watching it. And the whole thing with her just kind of drinking the blood and taking it all over her face and all down her chest. And I was like, is it just me? Is there something vaguely sort of pornographic about this? It was a full-on Game of Thrones moment, I thought, as someone who's only ever seen the first season of Game of Thrones.
I'm pretty sure that the listening audience will understand what I mean when I say an HBO or an HB bra moment, but just in case anyone is unclear, there is a pattern in HBO shows where they go, we can, because we're a premium cable network, we can show basically anything, and I feel like it's almost contractually obliged in shows that they produce that they have to, at points, go, and here's the mad shocking bit, you know?
Here's the pseudo porn bit.
Yeah, and there's a few moments in Lovecraft Country that I'm pretty sure the producers were like, maybe have her rolling around in the blood there in a sort of sexualized manner, you know? Which I guess I'm all for.
What I did think was cool immediately after that is when her white dress becomes a red dress in the pattern of the blood spatter. I actually thought that was quite a cool production design moment. It looked cool as fuck. Also, Abby Lee at her absolutely most reptilian in this scene, and when she's absolutely caked in blood, I was like, okay, no, she has actually just stepped out of one of my nightmares at this point. So yeah, 100% maximum Abby Lee. So let's just skip to the end of this ritual then. Christina is defeated by the Deus Ex Machina in the form of Gia.
Sorry, Deus Fox Machina, if you will.
Oh, buzzing. When you saw this, did you, like me, burst out laughing? Because as much as I get the tension of what's going on and the meaning of it, there is something just intrinsically, utterly, hilariously absurd about a woman sprouting hairy tentacles from her eyeballs to impale two people in order to complete some kind of ritual. All of it is so ridiculous that as soon as it happened, I just burst out laughing.
Yeah, I was right there with you. I couldn't withhold the absurdity giggles.
I mean, to be fair, I've not seen it before.
Here's the thing, right? So Gia is an invention of the television show, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder how the novel ends.
I can answer that question for you if you're willing to hear the spoiler.
Spoiler alert for the book Lovecraft
Country, the novel by Matt Ruff.
I
Apparently, the character of Caleb Braithwaite, because there is no Christina in the novel, is not killed at the end, but does have the power of magic removed from him, as indeed all white people get the power of magic removed from them. And effectively what happens is, apparently, they just leave him on the side of a road in the middle of nowhere and basically say, "No luck, mate. You'll have to fucking hitchhike," or whatever. And apparently it's kind of quite humorous in the book that he's just left standing there, suddenly realising that he's a normal person, and that they just kind of drive off saying, "Try making your own way in the world," and that's kind of how it ends. Oh. It's way less dramatic and way less, kind of hyper real, and none of the visceral excesses that we saw on screen. So I actually think I prefer that as an ending, to be quite honest.
Can you imagine reading that and going, I mean, nice ending, but do you know what it really needed?
It needed both characters impaled by the tentacle-like foxtail sprouting from the eyeballs of Tick's former Korean lover. It's an easy conclusion to leap to. I can see why they went for it. But yeah, no, it was so absurd. And to be fair, it might sound like I'm dissing it by saying that I burst out laughing. On one hand, I guess maybe it is, because it did subvert some of the tension somewhat. But at the same time, hats off to this show for just doing shit that I've never seen before. Like, when this show gets inventive, it really gets inventive. And the portrayal of Gia and the whole Kumiho, we talked before, that is an actual entity in Korean mythology. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's ever been portrayed this way.
No, certainly not in like Western live action television.
It was a really interesting portrayal. It will certainly stick with me. It's going to be one of those things that I'm definitely going to refer to in future conversations. It was undoubtedly memorable. So yeah, there was a lot going on here that was very unique to this show. One thing you cannot say about this show is that it is run of the mill. I mean, all the flaws it have do not stem from it just being formulaic.
The other thing that made me laugh, though, I think I texted you about this because your response was equally hilarious, was that reciting of the magic spells reminded me a lot of me mum and me dad and me nan and me gran in a bucket of Vindaloo. And you responded with...
It reminded me entirely of the guy, was it Jonathan Davis from Korn, circa 1996, where he used to do that pseudo-scat type thing. Yeah, that's totally where it brought me.
Prompting you to, I believe, call it Lovecraft Korntry.
Lovecraft Korntry. So, yeah, Tick dies, Christina dies, white people have the power of magic removed from them. So, how
that's
do
at
we
least
feel?
one privilege we lose.
Right, exactly. How do we feel about this ending? Is it satisfying? This, by the way, before we get to the coda with D, because I want to address that separately.
Okay. I'm not sure what this show could have done to have a satisfying ending.
Mm.
It had good moments as a series, it had bad moments as a series. I wasn't invested enough in the story of the central characters for anything they'd done to really left me going, man, glad about that, you know.
I think my problem with the ending, as far as the reappropriation of magic to be used against white people but never by white people, I think that's a cool idea. Where I have a problem with it, though, is relating back to some things I said about the previous episode, about how the characters did not take the opportunity to actually, you know, try and impact history in a way that they might have been able to do. I feel like now wielding magic is less of a power than that would have been. Because this whole casting spells thing, here's another thing actually, or as a segue, that I have a problem generally with stories that involve magic spells, because I'm never quite sure, and I often feel like the writers of the stories themselves can never quite decide what the exact rules are about spells, how powerful they are, how they can be used, what their limits are. I feel like most writers of these kind of stories do play quite loosey-goosey with this stuff, and I feel like Lovecraft Country did that as well. So I'm not entirely sure how powerful any of these characters are now that they have magic in their hands. I'm not entirely sure what that means.
I would like to have had a look inside the Book of Names to see the spells broken down into power levels from 1 to 9, with a detailed explanation of the effects of each spell, its duration.
First of all, gay. Second of all, stupid.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, I like it as a concept. I think one of the other things that bothers me, though, is that this magic was not originally taken from black people. And something that the show never really reconciled is that we did actually see some voodoo being used in this show. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a bit odd that they did not do more with that, because that's already a black African tradition. And I thought it would have been a bit more powerful if they'd brought that back in some way and made that something that could combat, you know, Christina's power in some way.
Instead, what they did was cultural appropriation.
Titus Braithwaite, he basically got it from the Native Americans.
Yeah.
So, in a way, it's reappropriating Native American magic, which I'm not sure that was the best decision. In terms of how they told this story. I mean, I can understand why Matt Ruff in his novel might have kind of run roughshod over that a wee bit.
Matt Roughshod.
Us white male authors, sometimes we have a history of doing that, so I'm not shocked. But with what Misha Green and our writing staff were trying to do here, I'm just a bit surprised that they did not try and bring in the voodoo element a wee bit more and make that more of a presence in the story. And we've already learned that it does have power. It prevents Christina from entering Letty's house for a start. So I don't know why more wasn't made of that. And it would have been nice to see African traditional religious beliefs be rehabilitated a bit, because they have been demonized in our culture for centuries.
Oh, yeah.
So that seemed like it would have been worthwhile doing.
See, to bring it round to a show that I know you're a big fan of, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
I liked the first season of that show for what it was, but it did not make me want to continue watching it.
It was cancelled, but season 4, the last season, is coming, has an air date of the 31st of December, if anyone who's listening is interested. But there is a storyline in season 3 of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina where the witches who get their power from Satan have to contend with druids who get their power from nature. And then there's also a thing where there's also people who get their power from like a Lovecraftian entity, and then there's voodoo kind of magicians who get their power from voodoo, I should say, you know. So there's like a very like cultural differences in types of magic that they have to use to combat each other, and in it, voodoo isn't presented as an evil magic; it's presented as one of the good ones, because you know the main characters find themselves like discover basically all their powers coming from Satan anyway. So there's a sort of overriding presence of, wait a minute, are we the bad guys? But yeah, I thought like you say, I thought they might have done something of a similar bent in Lovecraft Country, having already presented a different type of magic from the Native American magic which was stolen by Titus Braithwaite.
Yeah.
But missed opportunity, and again, maybe time constraint.
Maybe, yeah. And all of these issues on this show are definitely interrelated, so I'm going to say a little from column A, a little from column B.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this coda then, with D. D basically comes along and finds Christina lying broken and paralysed under this wreckage, and basically just kills her. I have feelings about this, but I'm going to ask you first of all how you feel about this.
I was too busy going, like, check out the D800. And the other thing was, I was like, oh, right, of course. So D's the one that pushed with the robot arm and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, cool, show's over. Time to make dinner.
So, I do not dislike that D kills Christina, but it does make me a bit confused about what is being conveyed by Misha Green's decision to show this. Because there's a number of different ways you can take this. Like, one way you can take this is a tragic moment. This is a dark moment, because D is never now going to be... She's never going to live up to the potential she might have had as, you know, a happy-go-lucky teenager, young woman, you know, making her comics or whatever. She's now going on this dark, violent path. So that, in a sense, is a tragedy. I realise, however, as I'm saying that, of course, part of the show's message is that these characters live in a reality where they know that a lot of black children don't have those opportunities anyway. And so, in a way, maybe this is a comment on the fact that she was inevitably going to be turned to be involved in a conflict in some way, and at least in this sense, she's doing it on her terms. I'm not sure on which side I come down, to be honest. I came away from this having mixed feelings, and in a way, that's one of the most positive lasting feelings I have from this episode. I'm kind of glad I've not made up my mind exactly how I feel about it. One of the things that I did sort of entertain as an idea was, is this kind of a nod by Misha Green on the idea that the present young generation, Gen Z, kind of taking no shit and are very much up, it seems like, if you pay attention to a lot of popular culture and social media, are very much up for shaking things up and burning things down. Is this kind of a sly nod to that? I mean, it doesn't work out in terms of Dee, because she's actually literally a boomer. But in a way, that's a subversion. Is there some of that going on? I mean, I quite like that idea, whether it was intentional or not. It was one of the things I latched onto. Is like, I do like that as a kind of metaphor.
The Gen Zers, as the young kids are called these days, definitely have more of a fire to fuck things up.
Yeah, and it is something that I think most of us are aware of. I mean, I think certainly older generations, boomers particularly, and maybe millennials to an extent as well, are a wee bit disturbed sometimes by some of the things that Gen Z say. Gen Z for you Americans. I mean, there is this idea that millennials are now becoming the new boomers in the eyes of Gen Z, because their ideas are so much more reactionary when faced with some of the things that get through, some of the kind of anti-authoritarian memes that get shown, that get shared online. And I mean, I love all this shit. I think Gen Z are absolutely fabulous, and I hope they live up to their potential. That's all I'm saying. That's kind of why I dig this scene with Dee as a metaphorical Gen Zer. So that was the interpretation I did sort of log into, and I did find that quite exciting. On that subject as well, even if that's not the intended metaphor, it does also raise the idea that change has in some way got to be violent, and that's something that a lot of kind of mainstream cultural narratives really tend to shy away from, if not outright kind of disown as a concept. Like, quite often, particularly in US pop culture, we hear it a lot, that peace always has to be the way, and there is always the very selective reading of Martin Luther King, you know, completely ignoring some of the other things he said, that you know, everything has to be done with pacifism and non-violence. And I feel like this show is actually at least recognising the idea with this coda, with D, that actually violence is sometimes necessary. And in order for things to really change, there has to be some period of horror. And I actually thought that was a bold point to end on. So, to sum up then, first of all, that was definitely a season of television I've seen now. I would say, if I had to sum up Lovecraft Country, I would say, if I'm being charitable, which I am, because there's enough in this show that I'm going to give it charity because I think it deserves it, and I think there is genuinely great stuff in this show, even if most of it was potential and not realised. It was a noble failure, and it was the most noble failure because it definitely did have so much going for it in terms of its conception. It was the execution that really let it down in most cases. All the things I found frustrating about the show were only because I knew it had the potential to be better. One of the worst things in my experience of watching it was I did find the main characters were just often manipulated into behaving in ways that did not make any kind of sense, and it was only in order to shift the plot in specific directions. The characters were constantly servicing the plot, and it really should have been the other way around. As Sam Esmail says, #fuck plot.
Yep, fuck tick, fuck plot.
And I think, as I said before, so many of the Easter eggs, references, were nowhere near as rich as they could have been. And the show talks a lot about this, what should be its substance, without actually exploring the substance. So it tells us what it's doing, but doesn't actually follow through with what it's just told us it's going to do, kind of thing. And a lot of the horror as well, in some cases it was just perpetuating a lot of toxic tropes, and there wasn't enough of the deconstruction or subversion of the tropes. I've said already about the pacing, seasons worth of material in a single episode often. I'm not going to go over that again.
How many 5 out of 9 would you give Lovecraft Country, potentially season 1?
Season 1 of Lovecraft Country, after deliberating on this for quite some time now, I'm going to give it 5.55s out of 9.
A generous score. You were correct about your use of charity.
How about you?
I would go with, well, see, here's the thing. Did I enjoy elements of it? Yes. The elements that I enjoyed, were they amazing? Sometimes. This is a show that presented some of the best TV I've seen all year and some of the worst TV I've seen all year in one season. So I'm probably going to go ahead and give it 4.5s out of 9.
Okay.
As to the question of if it gets a season 2, would I watch a season 2, having watched season 1? And the answer to that is only if we decided that we were going to talk about it in this podcast. But for sheer enjoyment purposes, probably not.
If there's a season 2 of the show, whatever, I don't think there's any need for a continuation of this story with these characters at all. So if they do it that way, I'll be less interested. I'll still watch it though. I'm hoping if there is a season 2, and to be honest, I hope there isn't, because I don't think there's any need for one. But people are clamouring for one, so I don't want to deprive people of what they want. So let's say they get one. I'm hoping they'll do an anthology type thing instead, where they just have a whole new story with different characters. The other thing I'd say about it though is, I think Misha Green is a talented enough creator that I'm interested to see whatever she does next. Hopefully some of this has also been a learning experience for her. And I mean, artists generally only get better the more work they do. Well, actually, we could have a conversation about some exceptions to that. I'm absolutely willing to give her the chance, and I think she has more than enough ability to do interesting stuff. So whatever she does next, I will definitely give a watch.
I have heard from friends of mine who are black that they fucking loved the show.
Yeah, so many people love it. That they're seeing things about their own community that they don't see often. So
ultimately, I give it 4.55s out of 9, but also my opinion is worthless.
Right, yeah, I think that's an important caveat. And I think that really underlines our entire commentary on this show. How many hours have we contributed to this? How many hours of completely unnecessary commentary?
Quite a lot. So yeah, join us next time for when we start on our episode by episode recount of Sex in the City.
Yeah, we're just from now on going to find the most inappropriate media for two cishet white guys to comment on. So
that's our Lovecraft Country wrap up, I guess, done.
That is half the bottle on Lovecraft Country.
I think it's time we go and top up that bottle. And when we come back, we're going to talk about episodes 5 and 6 of season 4 of Fargo. Carrying on from last episode's deep dive into it. So yeah, Craig, is it my round?
I think it is your round.
We'll be right back after this short message.
What are you drinking tonight, James?
This evening I am drinking Russian standard vodka with Diet Coke and lime. I thought I would try something that wasn't beer or wine in an attempt to de-escalate the gut.
Yeah, fair enough.
What are you drinking this evening, Craig?
I'm going to shock you, and I'm going to shock the listeners. I'm not drinking wine this evening.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Yeah, shocking as it seems, I'm not on the vine. I am instead on the hops. I'm doing a classic Hamilton here. I am in fact drinking
the East Coast IPA?
You guessed it, bro.
By slavery apologist Green King.
Yes, the very same.
That makes it sound different than how I intended. They apologised for their role in slavery.
Yeah, they were the good kind of apologists for slavery, is what you're saying.
Literal apologists. Perhaps one of these days our drinks will synchronise. Or drink-ronise.
That'll be like crossing the streams in Ghostbusters.
Yep. Or like we were actually at the Tron. Not the Hamiltron, the other one.
Yep. Regular listeners, all four of you will remember that is our bar of choice. More of a theatre than a bar, but not for us.
Currently, I guess not either.
Currently lockdowned.
Man, I can't wait for the first opportunity we get to just stroll into the Tron like we own the place.
Yeah, I'm going to somersault in like Nicolas Cage entering Wogan in 1990.
Hug the bar staff. Lick the beer taps.
For anybody who doesn't get that reference, I'm going to put the link in the episode description. I'm just going to jump in there, start like flipping out £20 notes, just shoving them at them, doing high kicks a la the Sailor Ripley. Probably tear a hole in my crotch. Needless to say, 43-year-old Craig Woods is not anywhere near the peak physical condition of coked up Nicolas Cage in his late 20s.
Snakeskin jacket or not?
This hole in my crotch is a symbol of my individuality and advancing decrepitude. So another thing I did recently, I wanted to mention this in the podcast. I discovered another podcast lately that I'm really into. In fact, it was a mutual acquaintance of ours, James, Mr. Fielding Hope, alerted me to it. It's a podcast called The Strangeness of Dub, hosted by a guy called Edward George. It's on Morley Radio as part of Morley College London. And wait, James, is this an episode of
fSobriety?
Roll the music.
Give us a break! Give us a break!
Hello and welcome to another edition of fSobriety, in which I normally try and convince James about the goodness and greatness of an all-round wonderful fucking phenomenon that is reggae music, but that's not really what I'm doing this time. It's
Wait,
just a segue that happened naturally.
You say it's normally what we do, but we're not doing that today?
No, today I'm just literally talking about this podcast, Strangeness of Dub, hosted by Edward George. It is an absolutely fantastic podcast. Basically, it does explore the history of the dub genre, but it does it in a completely non-dry, non-academic way. And basically, it's almost like a kind of psychogeographical journey through the history of dub. And it kind of explores a lot of the mythos of some of the great artists. He has done a lot of stuff on King Tubby lately, and he obviously knows his stuff on King Tubby, because he's taken a lot of obscure details from King Tubby's life and made it a theme for an episode, and then kind of presented it in a way which it's the sort of conceptual stuff you see when people write books about, you know, Elvis, or somebody writes a book about some great white rock musician. There is, like David Bowie gets this a lot, where there's all this talk about, and quite rightly there is all this talk about those artists, the way in which they were important to culture on various different levels, how they kind of what their work did to correlate with the other culture being produced at the time, and how they kind of referenced that, and the way they created personas, all that kind of stuff. Edward George is essentially doing that with dub, and he's done a great job of it with King Tubby, and it's full of great historical detail about London sound system culture, and it's a great listen. I cannot recommend it enough. I mean, it's like listening to a good book. It's like an audio book. Here's why I would particularly recommend it to yourself, though, James. I know you quite dig some dub.
I've dipped my toes into dub in the past.
Right. And I have been hinting before that that's a good way to try and ease you into some of the more roots reggae oriented stuff. Edward George on this podcast, he does play a lot of music and most of it is dub, but he does splice in other stuff here and there, and there is like more kind of roots reggae stuff, and there's also like the odd bit of Afrobeat stuff as well that's relevant to what he's talking about. So it's quite an eclectic mix. So it might be an extra way to help immerse you into the world of reggae. So it could be worthwhile. It might make my job easier, is what I'm saying.
So are you saying I have to stop listening to my Savannah records and listen to something else?
You will never hear me suggest that people should stop listening to Savannah.
So, Craig, where can listeners of our podcast who may be interested in checking out the strangeness of dub listen to said podcast?
They can find that at www.morleyradio.co.uk and just search the strangeness of dub. I'm also going to put a link to it in the episode description, so you'll be able to find it directly from there.
Fantastic. So it's www.
Yes, welcome to the internet, Grandad.
It's more making a dub joke there. But we'll leave that in.
And that wraps up another stellar episode of fSobriety. Toodle pip.
Give us a break! Give us a break!
So yeah, that has been whiling away some of my spare time. What about yourself? Anything else been floating your proverbial boat?
Aside from Borat, aside from Homecoming, aside from the new tunes by Jungle Pussy, Ariana Grande and Dessa, I did watch the first two movies in the Resident Evil franchise. I had seen the first one already and I hadn't seen the second one. The first one was terrible when I first watched it, and it was equally terrible. Mm-hmm. Second one, even worse somehow. But I've started, so there's another 4 of them to go, so I'm going to stick with it, and I might actually do my own side podcast, which is just about me trying to explain the Resident Evil movie franchise.
Yeah, fair enough.
Check it out on Off the Bottle Networks, coming in 2000 and fucking never.
Well, since we last spoke, I remember talking to you about Diva Satanica, vocalist of Bloodhunter. If you missed that on our previous episode, listeners, go back and check out the link to Diva Satanica's performance on the Spanish version of The Voice, because it's a treat. But since then, hang on a second, James.
What?
Is this an episode of fSobriety?
I suppose it's going to have to be, isn't it?
Woohoo!
Cue the music.
Hello and welcome to another edition of fSobriety, the podcast in which we discuss all things metal. So James,
yes.
Since we last spoke, I've been keen for any further news on everything Diva Satanica is doing with Nervosa, the band she just joined. But they released on YouTube this week a wee docu-video diary of their recording their new album in the middle of Malaga. Really beautiful location. And it's quite cool because none of the 4 of them had ever met before. And I think I explained on the previous podcast that Prika Amaral, the guitarist and founding member of Nervosa, is the only original member left now, and so she had to recruit an entirely new band. So Diva Satanica is based in Spain, and the drummer is from Greece, I believe, and the bass player is from Italy. So they've all now converged in Spain to record this new album.
They're a truly international thrash outfit.
That is exactly right, and it's pretty entertaining stuff. The documentary snippet that they released. But I was thinking of you while I watched it, because I was not familiar with their new drummer at all. Eleni Nota is her name. But some of the footage of her laying down the tracks, I was like, James has to see this. So I am now just going to send you a wee link there on the old Skypeage.
Alright.
And we're going to leave this recording because I want to hear your reaction on the podcast.
Yep, I got that link. I'm going to check it out right now.
Do that a heckin' watch, friend. Treat yourself to the human battering ram that is Eleni Nota.
Ooh.
Good, huh? Yeah, I wanted to hear your reaction on the podcast.
Fucking hell.
I know, right? this is weird for me because the previous drummer, Luana D'Amato, I absolutely love. And so there was a part of me that was like, I don't want there to be a new Nervosa drummer. But then I saw this and I was like, alright, okay, now you've earned this.
Man, she is fucking fast. Man, she's got the power, the precision, the speed, the groove to play.
I was going to say the groove
fast.
is definitely there. Yeah, she's got it all going on. It's just amazing. It's like the drum kit. It's that perfect thing where the drum kit just becomes an extension of the person's body.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'm sending you this other link. This is Luana D'Amato, who's the original Nervosa drummer, who I love also. But she's now in the new band with Nervosa's previous singer / bassist. So I'm looking forward to this also. But you'll enjoy this too. She's an absolute powerhouse also. But Luana D'Amato, as you'll see, is a very slight young woman. And it's that kind of thing. It's like you don't think someone that small should be able to make that much of a racket and with that much precision. But
here we go.
This just in. Women classic metal, you guys.
Fuck me. Sorry, it's just gone on to the blast beats. Like,
yep.
Jesus.
I was looking forward to this.
Jesus fucking wept, man. How was she doing those blast beats that fast on the snare?
I know, right? It's like pure Lombardo.
Yeah. I'm not even kidding. I've tried to do that before. As she swapped, she's blasting with her right hand now.
I was going to say that. Yeah, you've not seen the best bit.
For anyone unfamiliar with the concept of a blast beat, it involves playing either 16th or 32nd notes with one hand, and it's something that I've tried to do, and I find I can do it with great difficulty, but not with any level of like precision and power that she's doing in this video.
No, the precision there is crazy. Yeah, I'm so excited that I now have 2 Diva Satanica bands, and I still have Luana D'Amato and Fernanda Lira playing together in a whole new band. Oh, what a time to be alive!
I might have a bit of a crush,
despite all the horrible shit going on. Yeah, I figured you might. Yeah, I'm putting links to these in the episode descriptions, so listeners, treat yourselves. If you enjoy metal and you particularly enjoy drummers and you especially enjoy women kicking ass in metal, then it doesn't get better than this. And that wraps up another edition of fSobriety. Doodle pip.
That was a stunning episode of fSobriety. Well done to all involved.
Say good news, listeners. We are now going to get to the Fargo.
So, listeners, since the last time we recorded a podcast, there have been 2 new episodes of Season 4 of Fargo.
And I have some thoughts. I'm going to take them sequentially, though. So I have more thoughts about episode 6 maybe than I do about episode 5. We'll get to that as I get to it. But
guys, we'll get to Fargo episode 6. Beginning with Fargo Season 4 episode 5.
Birthplace of Civilization. Both episodes, incidentally, were directed by Dana Gonzalez and written by Noah Hawley and Francesca Sloan. So, Birthplace of Civilization. Yeah, okay, let's talk the Jazz Club. I thoroughly enjoyed the Jazz Club. Mm-hmm. I bet you did as well, as a pair of jazz weirdos. Listeners, it's not all about reggae and death metal and R&B and pop music. It's also about the jazz. We will have a jazz spin-off podcast at some point, but as we discussed last episode, we haven't come up with a decent title yet.
Or at least not one that doesn't sound like Bill Cosby catchphrase, so yeah.
So yeah, I was really digging the vibe of this jazz club scene. It was all beautifully put together. Production design was 100% on point.
Mm-hmm.
And the music was pure, kind of like late bebop, like that kind of real Dizzy Gillespie vibe. All of this was so cool. I kind of wanted this scene to just not end. But of course, all good things come to an end, especially when they're in the form of a police bust. So we get some police brutality being dished out here, and I did write in my notes here, topical, but then it has been for centuries.
Yeah, it's not quite like tagging onto a moment so much as presenting the fact that this is just a thing that's existed since at least and way before 1950.
Indeed. The show is definitely making a point of highlighting it here, though. We do get the way this one guy particularly is treated, and Lemuel actually tries to say, hey man, that's a bit heavy-handed, and then kind of gets the evil eye and kind of has to step back. Yeah, all of this we are so familiar with now, but yeah, it never gets easy to witness. So Leon, who is his jazz driver, and Lemuel are jailed, and what I enjoyed about this, when you get outside, the fadas are all standing outside.
Yeah.
Like, being completely inconspicuous. Like, yeah, good job, guys.
There was no pretense on their part that they weren't responsible for the bust.
No, I mean, you could read this either as, is this more ineptitude on the part of Josto, or is it that they are just so upfront on how little respect they have for the Cannon Gang that it just doesn't really matter?
My impression was that it was the latter.
Yeah,
but
I think
now that you've brought up that it could be the former, that also would make sense.
I mean, it does work, but I think it was probably more the latter. We go from there to the warehouse scene, where Loy Cannon is doing the deal with Mort Kellerman from the Fargo crime syndicate for these heavy amounts of guns. Before we get into the description of that scene, James, did you notice the trucks outside the warehouse?
No.
They were all emblazoned with a company logo that said Treehorn Trucking. Jackie Treehorn was the porn magnate played by Ben Gazzara in The Big Lebowski.
Right.
So it's another little sly nod to the Coens here by Hawley. Now, something I wanted to point out here, this character, Mort Kellerman, this is a character from another season.
Right. Is it from season 2?
It is from season 2, and he is in fact played by the same actor. Now, you might be thinking, isn't season 2 set decades ahead? It is, but I'm not going to explain that any further. You're just going to have to wait and see. But
okay.
This was a great moment, because I did not, when he was name dropped in the previous episode, I did not expect that we were going to see Mort Kellerman. But here he is, and the same actor, and I was like, oh shit, they really are doing the work. They're tying it together. So, yeah. There are some theories about this season that have become very concrete amongst the fans about how it relates to other seasons. And the fact that Mort Kellerman appeared here has pretty much solidified these theories as true. That's all I will say. Now, do we think Mort Kellerman is going to keep his word on this deal?
Given the way that things are going in this series, I would say probably not. Because
it seems
no
like
one
white
likes
supremacy is going to win the day here, doesn't it?
No one likes a deal in this show.
Well,
no one sticks to a deal.
There's that as well, and it does seem like nobody's taking the Cannon Gang seriously at this point.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like this could, Kellerman kind of turning coat at some point could have some effect on the storyline in this season. But I'm really interested to see how that pans out, just because as a long-time viewer of the show, what kind of, is it foreshadowing or is it post-foreshadowing? What is the right word? I don't know.
After shadowing.
Holly, what is it?
The thing you're saying about white supremacy winning out, there's a hint of that in the jail scene later on.
Yes, there is. Yeah, very much. So Loy in this episode, he's very, very firm in claiming the funeral business as his own. And I notice in this episode he wants to take charge of everything personally after the bust that happens here at the warehouse. And he does. This is like a major contrast between him and Josto, because Josto is very desperate to palm off whatever duties he can off to somebody else. Loy is very much wanting to take control here. And it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out, because I think even in the subsequent episode, and we can get to that as we get to it, but it seems like it's both an advantage and a disadvantage at certain points, the way that Loy Cannon is going about this now. Although the later events of this episode may have caused his judgment to be a bit impaired, but we'll get to that in a bit. So the bust itself, of course, Otis Weff turns up. Loy Cannon appears to know about him having caused the death of his own commanding officer during the war by apparently failing in his role as a minesweeper. I thought this was a great detail, because as soon as they said he was a minesweeper, I thought, well, obviously, of course, somebody with OCD is going to be an amazing minesweeper. He's going to have that whole field mapped out in his head. So yeah, it's definitely a job that requires meticulousness. There's some really great dialogue here between these two characters. Otis Weft tries to hang it over Loy's head that, well, I bet you did not even fight in the war. And Loy has that line, so, well, why would I fight for a country that wants me dead? And I love Chris Rock's delivery of these kind of lines, because he's really diving into that most aggressive, kind of sharp-edged element of his persona that he has in his stand-up.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes he says stuff that is totally... It's like the punchline of one of his like more brutal stand-up jokes.
Yeah, when he really goes in for that cruel needling, and sometimes in his shows, that's the kind of vibe I'm getting from this character. And it does make this character a lot sharper, a lot more fiercer in those moments. We do get a bit of a continuation with that, with the way we see the exchanges with his wife and his mother-in-law in this episode. There's some good quality comedy moments in that.
I mean, don't get me wrong, it's brutal the way he...
Oh yeah, totally.
But like after like the big like sort of like violent vocal delivery at his wife, he turns and says to his mother-in-law,
"Can I get an mm-hmm?"
Yeah, that kind of broke the tension for me, and like I did, against my better judgment, have a bit of a chuckle.
No, same, and that was going through my head as well. I should not be laughing at this, because this is just pure patriarchy in action here, all the worst elements of toxic masculinity. But it's Chris Rock being Chris Rock in those moments. It's like he's so gifted at doing that stuff.
If it wasn't for the fact that I assume Noah Hawley being a great writer, if it wasn't for that, I would have just assumed that Chris Rock improv that line, because that seems a very just the kind of off the cuff way he delivered it was great.
I mentioned before that Chris Rock's performance has been receiving mixed reviews out there in the online sphere. People are very, very mixed on where they land on how they receive his portrayal of this character. I actually think he's got the balance absolutely right, because I don't think he's not doing a lot of demonstrative stuff in this role. Most of it is actually really subtle, which, and I think we said before, that's not what I expected from him in this role. So when he does turn on this stuff, for me, it's really effective. And I think, I don't know about you, but when I actually forget the wife's name, but when he basically shouts her down, she seems so completely devastated and lost all her confidence in the space of that. And it's disturbing, because when I was watching him doing that, I was like, when you've got someone who is that sort of mode of toxic masculinity, but they're a good orator, they're able to wield some really toxic power over people. Yeah, and even someone who was full of confidence 2 seconds ago can just instantly deflate.
I remember you telling me that people were also a bit like, why did you cast Jason Schwartzman? Mm-hmm. Maybe expecting more of a Jason Schwartzman role, but both him and Chris Rock are doing, I think, like fucking God's work with our roles here. They're both being quite subtle in different ways. I mean, Schwartzman's always going to be Schwartzman, right?
Sure, yeah.
But he's both of them are like reeling in what you would expect from them to a degree, and really letting a lot of like the kind of character nuances kind of shine through a subtle performance.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of people just not really appreciating just how nuanced both of these performances are. There's a lot of layers to both these performances that I don't think they're getting their due for. Like Schwartzman is doing a lot of stuff that is really subtle, and the show is definitely playing on our expectations of these two actors. There's no doubt about that. But it's doing it in a way where, rather than just it being, haha, you thought this guy was going to be this guy, but he's this guy, it's more sort of, well, he is that guy, but what you didn't understand about that guy is that there were all these things about him right in front of you the whole time, but you were too busy, kind of with your own surface perception of what that guy was about. I think there's a lot of that going on with these two characters. Anyway, back to the bust.
Yep.
Turns out Dick Deffy Wickware was sitting outside watching the whole thing, because of course he was. He visits Otis the next day. Now this fucking scene, man, where Otis Weft explains what happened to his fiancée, this is the grimmest shit. I was like, I was not prepared for this character to have this kind of backstory.
Yeah, it was unexpectedly fucking tragic.
I mean, I was fully on board for just ridiculing this character, and this is classic Fargo, though. I mean, it has a way of just forcing
reactions out of me towards characters that I could not have foreseen I would have had that reaction to. I'm fully all about buffoon Oda's Wef and funny OCD Oda's Wef and bit of a dickhead Oda's Wef. I was not at all prepared for, man, this guy has really been through the ringer. Maybe I should cut him some slack Oda's Wef. I was not prepared for that at all, and I still don't know how I feel about it. Yeah, apparently the story was he had a breakdown in the minefield because he'd received a letter about what had happened to his fiancée who had been raped and murdered, which, fucking hell. And then, so he just started having a breakdown in the minefield, and so the commanding officer presumably thought the minefield had been swept, and it had not been swept. Deafy's reaction to this, though, when he tells him this story, it's pure Oliphant perfection. He just has that moment of pause, and there's the kind of the raised eyebrows, and he's like, huh. And it's like, it made me think, how affected is Deafy by this story? Because I'm now starting to, considering what we know about Deafy, we know he's very conservative. We know he's a Mormon. There's got to be, those have got to be angles somewhere to, roots to his heart if he has one. Mm-hmm. And I kind of feel like if anything's going to make him feel sorry for somebody, it's like, well, here is a guy who actually went out and fought for his country. I feel like that might yank something at Deafy, but that's only if he is capable of feeling anything like that. And at the moment, I still don't know one way or the other. But I think the patriotism angle, who knows? Maybe it'll come to something. The other possibility here is, and I say possibility, I mean it's also definitely in play, is that Deafy also sees this as a way he can play Otis. So regardless of whether he feels sorry for him or not, he's still gonna manipulate him in some way. End. Yeah,
Deafy is a complete enigma.
He really is. Yeah. Although, in saying that, there is one character that causes him to lose his composure a wee bit later, but we'll come to that in a bit. Going back to the cell, and you mentioned this earlier, this scene with Josto. We get Leon in the cell with the rest of the Cannon gang. Leon is not a popular guy at this point because everybody said you should not have taken Lemuel to that jazz club where all this illegal stuff is going on. And they're basically telling him, you're fucked, you're dead. Yep. Lloyd's going to kill you, basically. Now, here's the thing I'm thinking of, though, and this is kind of looking past the subsequent episode. Could Leon's punishment actually end up coming in the form of him being promoted? Could it be a poisoned chalice that he gets handed in the absence of Dr. Senator?
It could be, but we'll come to Dr. Senator shortly.
Yeah.
Press F.
Press F for Dr. Senator. Josto turns up, and he has this monologue about America loving a crime story because it is a crime story. And when they see someone like me committing crime, the general public love me because they see me doing what I can to get ahead. They see people like you, meaning black people, all they see is crime. And this is the kind of stuff that has been said in TV dramas many, many times. So I guess we have to ask the question, is it particularly effective? Because surely these characters, I think, are in a world where they already know this as well. I think the question that this raised for me, though, is do Loy's gang get browbeaten by this, or does this instead kind of galvanise them? Does it have the reverse effect that Josto wants?
The thing that I thought about it was foreshadowing for later in the episode when Loy turns up at the hotel. Mm-hmm. And Zelmir and Swanee's reaction to him is just like, we don't give a fuck, we're outlaws. They're like, we're not criminals because we're outlaws. And then it presents like a third, again, it's like having that sort of third viewpoint of, you get the criminal that the guy watching is going to root for, you get the criminal they're not going to root for, and then you've got the criminal that doesn't want to be called a criminal because criminal seems to mean that you operate within a set of rules.
Yeah, and I think these two scenes happening in this same episode, this is something Fargo does a lot, where it does this very deliberate, very transparent mirroring of two different scenes in two different situations. And it's one of the things that critics of the show always say, that this kind of thing is a bit clunky, it's a bit artificial. And it is artificial, absolutely, but it's artificial in the same way that this is exactly the kind of writing that Cormac McCarthy does, and he gets lauded for it constantly. But Cormac McCarthy has zero sense of humour, whereas Noah Hawley has a raucous sense of humour. Mm-hmm. And so
I think there's this thing where certain critics are incapable of taking this stuff for what it is, without adopting this kind of, this is so obvious signposting these two scenes. It's like if Cormac McCarthy did this in a novel, you'd be all over it. But it's just because Noah Hawley does it with a nod and a nudge and a wink and a little bit of humour and some snappy dialogue. It's just a whole different thing. It makes it very playful. I think some critics are a bit adverse to how playful Noah Hawley sometimes gets. So Rabbi Milligan is also here in this scene, and he kind of says to them, just make sure you keep the boys safe. And they're kind of saying, can you do something to sort this situation? And Rabbi Milligan is very fatalistic here, just says, no, you guys are all dead anyway. I really enjoy Ben Wishaw's performance in this role. I think he's really perfectly cast here because he looks and sort of feels like he's such a slightly built guy, and he's so kind of softly spoken that when he delivers this kind of stuff, he's such a good actor that he makes it work in a way like it's genuinely chilling when he delivers lines like this.
Yeah, I can't stop thinking ever since I clocked who he was. I just can't not see Pingu. But he's also
forever be Pingu.
Yeah, but he is. You're right. His whole demeanor and his stature, the way he carries himself, is so like the guy that's in the corner that everyone sort of forgets about. He's so quiet that when he delivers a line like "You're all dead," it's like, oh yeah, he fucking means it.
It feels it feels meaningful. It feels absolutely meaningful because it's coming from him. Whereas if it comes from Josto, it just seems like more Josto flexing.
Yeah.
And it'd be the same if it came from Lloyd Cannon. If it came from Lloyd Cannon, you'd be like, well, does he mean that? You wouldn't be entirely sure if he was serious. There's no doubt that Rabbi Milligan's serious. He believes that's what's going down. Okay, meanwhile, Ethel Vida writes a letter to Dr. Harvard, posing as a former colleague of Orietta Mayflower, and basically grassing her up for all the things she discovered in the Chief Wiggum secret closet of mystery. Now, I love this whole thing with Thurman. He comes into Ethel Vida's bedroom and he starts inadvertently just blurting shit out. And I love this character because he's clearly someone who's so lost, does not quite know what his place is in the world. He's constantly unsure of everything. So it's like he has to think aloud constantly. And because of that, he's incapable of keeping anything secret.
Yeah.
And I think Andrew Bird's performance is really great because he's just... it's almost like his expression never changes, and you might think that's a bad thing for an actor, but in this role it's perfect because this character is just constantly unsure all the time, and he's constantly looking to whoever else is in the room with him to be the authority in the situation, and that apparently even extends to his 16-year-old daughter. So he recognised, the thing is he's not witless because he recognises something is definitely not right with Orietta. And he says to Ethel Vida, you should probably stay away from her. She's a bit of a wrong one. I don't know exactly what. Right, that's the next thing is he just comes out and says, I think she probably poisoned that pie, so,
It's like, go near her.
It's like, that. Surely that invites follow-up questions. Anytime he's in these kind of scenes, I always think to myself, if he was a real person and he was speaking on BBC News, he would be a nightmare to subtitle. And I say this from experience because he's the kind of person who he's incapable of completing a sentence without trailing off. And when you subtitle people like that live, it is a pain in the ass because you're never sure how to punctuate. Because you're like, do I put a comma in here? It looks like he's pausing. Is he going to say something else? Like, oh no, he's trailed off. New sentence. It's like, fuck's sake. He would be a nightmare to subtitle. He would also be the world's worst poker player, I think it's safe to say. He also has this line here where he just says, I actually loved the delivery of this. He basically said, your aunt, she's just an escaped convict. As if, that's just the way it is. Everything's matter of fact, everything's in stream of consciousness, there's absolutely zero filter. So Ethel Vida, as she was advised not to do, of course, goes and visits Zelmer and Swanee. Zelmer and Swanee have this spiel about the difference between squares and outlaws and criminals, as you alluded to. The other thing this scene does here, it also recalls Loy's tendency to play the game. Because as much as Loy is a criminal, he's also desperately trying to be a member of society. And we've seen that with the way, he tried to sell the credit card idea to the bank and all this kind of stuff. He wants to be a respected member of society. Whereas Zelmir and Swanee are singing from an entirely different hymn sheet. They don't really give a fuck about society. They've kind of already internalised the fact that
society does not care about them regardless. So in order to live with any degree of dignity, they have to kind of just do an Elliot Alderson and say F society. So they're not even towing the outlaw line, is really what's happening here. And I like what they say to Ethelreda here when they ask her what she is. And Ethelreda just says, I'm Ethelreda Pearl Smutney, I'm one of a kind. And it's like she's taken that a level even further. And I really enjoy this character. I'm really excited about where this character is going, because she's clearly the one character in this whole situation who is able to observe how everyone is falling into all these pockets. And she's got it in her mind that, well, the only way the way society can advance or I can advance is if I transcend that kind of thing. And that character has never come out and said that. You can see it working. I think it's interesting to note this scene. These are all really smart characters, these three characters in this scene. And there's no way any of these characters can play the game without inevitably losing, because the way American society is, no matter what any of these three women do, they will inevitably become locked into either, being way at the bottom of society's ladder, or else locked into tracks of lawlessness in order to survive. And I feel like this is a big part of what Noah Hawley is doing with this season.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see everything slotting into place. Even how many episodes does this have?
11, so we got another 5.
Yeah, so it's like, obviously I don't have any previous Fargo knowledge to go off of, but it seems like his whole set up, slot everything into place, payoff thing is gonna, like, routine is going really well. Yeah,
definitely. I think one of the things I said to you before, James, is about this show is that it is all about watching the dominoes fall and not really knowing what pattern they're going to fall in. And so all of these characters are on the potential death board, and all of these characters are potentially going to incur some kind of disaster. And I almost hate Noah Hawley at these moments, like the scene I just described, because that scene made me love these characters even more. And the whole time I was thinking, he's really going to hurt these characters in some way, and I'm going to be so fucking mad about it. We'll get to the Dr. Senator thing in a moment, because that definitely corresponds with that. But first of all, though, Lloyd Cannon visits the Smutneys, because, of course. And we see Thurman here coming to terms with the scale of his mistake and just feeling completely adrift. And he actually comes out and says something like, I didn't understand the rules.
You know, the bit when Lloyd turns up at the door and he says, aren't you going to invite me in? I don't know if that was a deliberate throwback to vampire lore, but like he turns out he is a vampire. He's there to suck them dry at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was pretty sweet.
The whole tension here with Debrell realising what's happened exactly, and then her kind of breaking down and trying to plead with Loy. I love how the tension in this scene is undercut by the fact that Zero is there, the kid. Yeah. And Loy eventually says, all right, give the kid a piece of cake. And the kid is just sitting there scoffing the cake while they're having Debrell and Thurman's world is falling apart around them. Yeah, that's classic Fargo. This scene sort of mirrors Ethelreda's confrontation with Deafy later, because both of them are being asked to give up Zelmare and Swanee or face losing everything. And in both cases, it's all about power relations. Loy is very much representing that patriarchal thing I was talking about, whereas Deafy, also patriarchal, but he's specifically presenting white supremacy in the case against Ethelreda. Let's just talk about that scene now, actually. So Ethelreda gets called into the principal's office again, but of course she finds it's Deafy that's waiting for her. This exchange I really thought was brilliant, and I think this young actress who plays Ethelreda going toe to toe with Oliphant here, I thought was absolutely superb. We see that she really bristles at his racism, and she's ever the smartest person in the room. That's kind of her part in this show. And you can see she really relishes pointing out that actually civilization began in Africa, and actually you and I are descended from people who once lived on the same savannah, as she puts it. And
And this is the first time we've seen Deafy rendered speechless. It's the first time he's seen a wee bit cast adrift by another character. It's rare to see any Timothy Oliphant ever be speechless in the face of anyone. He's not normally in those kind of situations, especially if you're familiar with him from the likes of Justified and whatnot. He's always in control, and so even for this brief moment where he's not in control, I feel like Noah Hawley knows exactly what he's doing by putting this in here. So yeah, he's threatened to have her expelled, and in order to try and extract Zelmare and Swanee's location, he reveals the nature of their crimes. So it turns out they have been guilty of murder. The circumstances are a wee bit muddy, but it certainly does not look good, right?
Yep.
The one thing that struck me about this, I don't know if it occurred to you, is like, how do we know, how would Ethelreda be certain that Deafy is telling the truth, though? Because they could be making this up.
Mm-hmm. I assume that he is making it up, and I assume that she like was on board with that notion, like she could see that. Because you're right, her character is very much that idea of the smartest person in the room at any given time, and has always been underestimated because both of like her age and her colour, you know. I was kind of under the impression that she was onto him, and if he was lying, or at least she could read him well enough to know that if he was lying, that she'd pick up on it. Still not sure about that.
I'm still not sure either. I was a bit unclear about it. But either way, the way this scene plays out, it was a great exchange. I thought both actors were absolutely top quality. And when Ethelreda drops the whole thing about the birthplace of civilization, you really see the rage in Timothy Oliphant, the suppressed rage. Like, because this is white supremacy in action. You can really see in every twitch of his face, in his posture, he's thinking, you know, he sees her as nothing more than an animal, really. I mean, because that's the kind of stock he comes from. That's how hardcore his white supremacy is.
I mean, he says as much when he's introduced, when he's talking to the police chief. Yeah.
And so we really do get that sense that, well, you're not going to get the better of me. And I was really afraid for Ethelreda at that moment, because I thought, Deafy's a clever, devious guy. If he wanted something bad to happen to Ethelreda, it could happen. So in any event, I guess she feels she's forced to give up the location. So a tragic end to that scene. I wanted Ethelreda to come out on top, but it wasn't to be. Anyway, I did have the ensuing scene. My nerves shot right up because Deafy makes his way to the hotel where Zelmare and Swanee are hiding out at the same time as Lloyd Cannon is going there. This is classic Fargo, by the way. This happens at least once every season, where you get characters converging on a location, and it usually does not unfold how you think it's going to unfold. But Fargo loves its disasters, or its potential disasters, and they can sometimes just manifest in the most unremarkable ways, or sometimes they can be outright cataclysmic. So I was prepared for anything to happen here. Weirdly enough, what happens here is actually fairly consistent with most sort of gangster dramas, which in this show, I suppose, it did still subvert my expectations, because I did not expect it from Fargo. But Loy basically recruits them as soldiers that he can use, undercover soldiers that no one will know, which I guess makes sense. I mean, it's a wee bit of a stretch, but I guess when you think about it, it sort of makes sense. But it was worth it for getting Timothy Oliphant to arrive there, realise they've left, looks out the window, sees the Cannon gang taking them away, and Timothy Oliphant's delivery of "son of a biscuit."
That was amazing. I thought that they were dead. I didn't see that recruitment happening.
I was really worried they were going to die, yeah.
Especially after...
I'm still worried they're going to die.
No, especially after you told me that Fargo has a habit of killing off characters you like. And then when they didn't die, you know, I was like, whew!
Not only that, though. Yeah, I mean, it was a bait and switch, because, of course, we did still get a major death this episode. But not only that, another thing I will say is Fargo often has notable duos in the cast, and things usually end badly for duos in Fargo, and that's all I'll say about that. So going back again to Zelmare's whole spiel about criminals playing by the rules when it suits them, this sort of plays into Lloyd Cannon getting other people to do his dirty work. It's another way where he can still try and appear as legit as possible, while getting other people to do it. And in a way, this is something he has in common with Josto, because as I mentioned earlier, Josto is also often handing off duties to someone else. But in Josto's case, it's usually because you get the sense that he doesn't quite know how to handle it, which I guess is the major difference between the two of them.
I love Josto's constant being undermined and like having to remind everyone that he's the capo, you know, he's in charge.
Right, yeah. And I love that he even uses that word, I'm the capo, and it just sounds so lame coming from his mouth.
Because a lot of the time it sounds more like he's trying to convince himself than anyone else that's in the room. It's so good.
On the subject of Josto, there was a nice moment in this episode. It was really fleeting, but it was one of those short scenes that just had some really clever dialogue that I think Fargo does really well. It's when Rabbi Milligan is sitting with Satchel going through his maths problems, or math if you're an American, maths. Reclaim that S.
There's only one math.
There is only one math.
There can be only one.
Yeah, Josto, it says he's at a loss when it comes to maths, doesn't really understand it. And there's that thing, there's a bit of dialogue here where you wouldn't say that about being bad at English, and Josto says, well, lots of people say they are bad at English, and Rabbi Milligan says, but they're not proud of it. And it kind of plays back into this whole thing about identity and what it means to be an American, and how it means you have to conform to certain things when it comes to language, how you express yourself. There's all these wee subtle things going on in this show all the time that I really love about Hawley's writing. And
yet, in the next episode, when people are speaking Italian in his office, he tells them to speak American.
Yeah, that was a nice follow-up. I also like as well that Rabbi Milligan has this line, and again, it's a sleight of hand line, but I really dug it, where the fact he's teaching Satchel maths, and then he says to Josto, your problem is a math problem, divide your enemies or they multiply. And it's such a simple thing, but I really dig that Noah Hawley puts these things in there. You really get, it's once again, you hammering home the sense that Rabbi Milligan is the true strategist in this situation, but he's always in the backseat. And he's in a way, he's similar to Ethel Reader, because he's someone who people will turn to for when they know that they need someone clever to advise them on something, but they don't actually get the respect in return. They're continually dishing out advice and not getting any respect for it. At the end of this scene, we also get Rabbi Milligan saying to Satchel, be ready, when the shooting starts, we vanish. So we're really getting the seeds here that Rabbi Milligan is not sticking around. He can see how the chips are going to fall, basically, and he's already planning a way out. And he clearly has become attached to this kid, and I guess it's because he looks at the kid and sees himself, because he's been through this shit several times now.
This thing, Rabbi, more than any other character in the show, has a sense of how this all plays out. He's seen it from like every side, and also is no stranger to betrayal himself. So
yeah, exactly. I think what adds the edge to it as well is we know that Rabbi Milligan will do what he feels needs to be done. This is a character that's capable of extreme acts. So as much as he's got all this compassion, he's got that edge that, he can, anything he has to do to make that happen, whatever violence has to be enacted in order to get that peaceable solution, he will absolutely follow through with it. So the stakes are high with this character, and I quite enjoy that. Okay, we have to move on now to who is still my least favourite character in this show. And I am, of course, talking about Nacho Libre himself, Gaetano, who is becoming more and more difficult with each subsequent episode for me to watch without erupting into exasperated sighs. This is starting to get on my goat a wee bit. The extreme performance, I'm sure this guy's a good actor. He's obviously been directed to act this way. It's too much on the cartoony side for me, and I already said that prior, but we're now halfway through the season, and I'm like, I'm not convinced by any of this. There has to be, at some level, this is all an act, and I think we do see in episode 6 that it does become an act, because we do see him at his weakest in that episode for a moment. But that makes me all the more exasperated that we're continuing to see him do this stuff. I need less of this in my Fargo. How do you feel about this?
I don't know, I kind of enjoy the cartoonishness, especially given like what you said in the next episode when you see him fumbling his bullets and stuff and like getting nervous as shit when the shooting really goes down. Like he's obviously as a character, I say he's obviously, like I know, I think what they're going is that this is a guy for whom bravado is a way of life.
Yeah.
And he's constantly peacocking at 11, you know. And then when you eventually see that kind of facade drop, I thought that was really satisfying. Just like, yeah, fuck you, Brian Gaetano.
I suppose I did as well, but I think the problem I'm having with this character is I don't know, am I supposed to just be laughing at him, or am I supposed to find him scary, or is it supposed to be some uneasy balance of both? And even after seeing that other side to the character in episode 6, I still don't really know, and it is starting to bother me a bit. I'm just like, every time he's on screen now, I'm just like,
It still bothers me a little that I thought he was doing an over-the-top Italian accent until I discovered that he's Italian. I was like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Alright, so he and Calamita in this episode, after his humiliation at the hands of Josto in the previous episode, Gaetano's deciding that the gloves are off, kind of thing. So he and Calamita are on the street. They make their way to this bar. Gaetano does the most Laurel and Hardy fucking slip on the ice I think I've ever seen, possibly outside of maybe Homer Simpson. It was pretty extreme. And as soon as that busboy burst out laughing, I was like, okay, he's dead.
Yeah. We've all seen Goodfellas.
Yeah, exactly. There was a strong Goodfellas vibe going down here, and I was like, there's no way that kid is making it out of this episode. But once again, the humour here is definitely a wee bit broader than usual. It's not usual. I mean, in fairness, there's not a lot of this season, but where this character is concerned, yeah, some of the humour is just like, I'm just confused as to how I'm supposed to be feeling about this. It is also, in a weird way, making Calamita less believable as well, because I feel like he's supposed to be the grounded one in this duo, and I feel like some of it's been a bit undermined by just how broad Gaetano is. I don't mean physically, it's not me fat shaming.
Yeah, broad
Calamita's
exaggerated.
Yes. Calamita's trying to be the strategist, clearly, and he's trying to rein Gaetano in a wee bit, it seems. But I'm not quite sure what the mechanics are in this relationship, or what it is Calamita thinks he can gain from this relationship, really. I guess we don't know enough about Calamita to be able to say. We'll go into the detail about this scene. So they go in there, in the bar. Gaetano is appalled at the coffee, and he starts ranting about American Lady Jesus, and Americans not wanting to work because they all think they can be president. And back in Italy, he did have a great line. This was a great line. Said, "We had to nail our Jesus to the cross, otherwise he comes down and kills every last motherfucker in Jerusalem." That was a great line. But all this swaggering bravado, right, clearly he's a dickhead. We're not meant to sympathise with him. I get that. But is he meant to be scary at this point? I mean, I'd already taken it for granted he was going to kill at least the kid here. And I don't want to make it seem like that's not a big deal, but I already saw that coming as soon as the kid laughed. And so the way this unfolded was a wee bit kind of flat for me. I was just like, well, okay, but. So, I mean, he ends up embodying the Italian Jesus and gunning down both the busboy and the barman. And this is the kind of thing where, is it necessary to show villains doing this hair trigger erupting into violence kind of thing? How often have we seen this now, and is it still an effective way to convey the menace of a character, if indeed menace is what they're going for here?
No, it feels like, like you say, the second the busboy laughed, they could have cut the scene there, and you'd have been like, you would have walked away from it, not walked away from the TV, it'd be weird, but you could have gone away from it assuming, okay, so he killed the busboy for laughing at him.
Yeah.
It might have actually been better than seeing the whole thing play out.
Maybe
maybe Noah Hawley just wanted to put Lady Jesus in a script, and who are we to argue?
I just don't know how much we got out of that scene. I don't know how important it was, because everything that compels them to go and meet Dr. Senator, I feel like has already happened prior to that scene. So I don't know. I wasn't fond of this scene. Is my long-winded way of getting to that point. Fuck's sake, Woods, rein it in. But it does make me question, what is Calamita's play? Why is he back to this particularly rabid horse? I mean, does he just see this as a way to power for himself? Is he like Gaetano's rabbi, but more hands-on? Does he actually think that he's in charge and controlling Gaetano?
I'm not sure if he thinks he's going to get more power with Gaetano than with Josto, or maybe he just thinks Josto is straight up like shit at being a mob boss, and he's really
that isn't unreasonable, to be fair.
And he's pinning his hopes to like the more traditional kind of evil, nasty, crazy guy.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving to the scene with Dr. Senator. Press F.
Do we have to? This saddened me.
This whole scene, man, the fact you get some of the gravitas of Dr. Senator in this scene, that really hammers home just how fucking ridiculous Gaetano is. And the fact he's in this scene in the background, like squirting fucking sauce all over his sundae, and what is this? Is this supposed to be menacing? I don't understand what was going on there. He had pure Augustus Gloop energy in this scene.
Good callback.
But thankfully, he at least lets Calamita do the talking. Calamita has certainly got more of an edge than Gaetano, but I think he still looks... I mean, definitely he's very weak still next to Dr. Senator. And Calamita's story about coming to America as an orphaned baby in a box, that was quite a cool detail. I did quite enjoy that, and this is the kind of... Fargo has done this sort of thing before, where it just throws in these bizarre, macabre details about a character's backstory. They just sort of linger in your mind. And who knows, Calamita could even be bullshitting, but it's a good story, and it kind of suits the character. But I like the whole... It adds a different sort of angle to the whole what it means to be an immigrant, what it means to be an immigrant American.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is that whole sort of cursed by fate before he arrived type thing. And how these characters, a character like Calamita is almost like, on some level, kind of an inevitable product of this whole process of the way America treats its immigrants. And, you know, there is that sense of, will he go on to become kind of the truth of America that America doesn't want to look at, sort of thing. All of that said, though, it's all undercut, as I say, by the fact that Dr. Senator is 100% the adult in the room. This scene, though, between the two of them, I gotta say, ignoring Augustus Gloop in the corner, who I thought, I don't even understand why he was there. This scene would have played better if he had not been there. Although I did like Dr. Senator's line about, am I talking to you or am I talking to him? This was a set piece of subtlety. It was a real battle of wits and words. And that's something this show does really well. In all the previous seasons, it does. I mean, one thing I think some viewers don't particularly like about this show is that there's a lot of monologuing. If you're not a fan of monologuing, this is not the show for you. But I think Fargo does a great job of putting great words in these actors' mouths. And while it might seem way too flowery to be the kind of conversation people would have in real life, it nonetheless makes for excellent TV drama. The back and forth here, the references to Machiavelli, and the fact that Dr. Senator is a bit more up on Machiavelli than Calamita is, little details like that. I love that kind of shit. And even the physical stuff, like Dr. Senator making sure to pour his sugar into his coffee in front of Calamita because he knows that will bother him. The little exchanges with the waitress, like at first refusing coffee, and then he realises it can be seen as a power play if he actually just takes the coffee. Stuff like that. It's so subtle and just so good. If they have a bluff, then he calls it here. Because, you know, these guys have gone rogue, and Dr. Senator realises that. He realises very quickly this is not from the top down. This is not an official meeting, as it were. But the problem with that is, and I'm sure you got it as well, the sinking feeling that Calamita's going to get so upset he's just going to shoot Dr. Senator, and I realised that was going to happen.
Yeah.
The way it was played was nice, though. I like that Dr. Senator got to go out with dignity. He got to walk outside, and Glenn Turman's performance here when he hears the door open, it was tragic, man. Really tragic. I felt so heartbroken to see his realisation on his face. Like, nah, this is it. This is what I thought was going to happen. And I did say to you earlier in the week,
I actually shouted, "No!" It was like, here's the thing, that I knew Dr. Senator's card was marked as soon as this show began, mainly because he was never the type to make it to the end of a season of Fargo, because he's too wise, too mature, way too calculated for a war that just gets messier by the episode. He was too calm ahead, capable of steadying a ship, and as such he had no chance of steadying the ship of Fargo, because a steady ship is not what Fargo does. So that's it, the war starts here. There was this heartbreaking coda to this episode where we see Dr. Senator's body just still lying out there, and after nightfall, and it's like, man, I mean, it's more commentary on the way Black lives are seen as disposable, but it is also historically accurate, unfortunately. Chris Rock's haunted expression here I thought was perfect. That's an expression on his face we had not seen so far, and you really got the sense that he's recognising just what a wound this is, and we recognise this has made him significantly weaker. And given the patriarchy that he's been embodying very much in this episode, one of the things that occurred to me is like, is his patriarchy now immediately undermined? Can he actually back it up? And so one character we did not mention, because she gets barely a look in the whole episode, but we see Orietta looking over a patient who's got some serious gut circus going on and just slamming her head against the wall. Clearly this murder celibacy is not sitting well with her.
Yeah, she's just itching to snuff him out.
Yeah, so... yeah, I've got some things to say about that, but it's more relevant to the next episode. But that wraps it up for episode 5. How did you feel about this episode all in all, and what is your score?
I really enjoyed episode 5. Despite your warning about characters dying, I was still pretty shocked. I wasn't shocked that Dr. Senator died. I thought he was going to die, and then I was like, as soon as that restaurant scene started, I was like, fuck, here we go. They're going to kill off the doc. But then when he made it out of the restaurant, I was like, oh, maybe not. And then you hear the door, and I was like, fuck, no, he's not made it. There's a glimmer of false hope. As a whole, I would give this episode, I'd say maybe 7.5, 5s out of 9.
I think I'm exactly level with you. I think 7.5, 5s out of 9 is where I would go with it. Yeah, it was a solid, strong episode, and obviously there was some major events here. The Dr. Senator thing being the major one. The major thing. I used major twice. No, I've used it 4 times.
Major.
I've used it 4 times and you can't stop me. So yeah, it was a strong episode. I did leave this one thinking all kind of hell is going to go down in this next episode. And it sort of did and sort of didn't.
Which brings us along to...
Episode 6. It is titled Camp Elegance. Okay, so I'm going to preface this because I think this might be my least favourite episode of the season so far. It was a bit rushed, a wee bit cramped, a wee bit raggedly structured. Consider how much I criticise Lovecraft Country for certain things. I think it's only fair I do the same for Fargo when I feel it is falling short, and there is moments here where I'm like, this could be better. This season was originally devised as 10 episodes, and Noah Hawley convinced FX to give him 11 episodes, but he did so in the editing stage. So there were 2 episodes here that were converted into 3 episodes. It looks like that's what's happened, right?
Right.
So, and I think in this episode, the seams do show quite a bit. So I don't have any problem with what's happening in the story necessarily, but I think the pacing and the structure here was a bit all over the place. It was kind of dull on the edges for me here in places. For instance, right, there is a scene, and I'm sure you noticed it because it leaps right out, where there's a scene between Loy and Dr. Senator in this episode. And it's presented to us as though it's supposed to be a flashback. But it's done in such a way that there's nothing around it particularly to signify that. And don't get me wrong, I realise we're in the age of prestige TV. Audiences are sophisticated enough now to know what a flashback is when there is one without it being absolutely, signposted.
Yeah,
right, like they did in the old days with the old Vaseline on the lens and all that. I have a strong theory this was not written as a flashback. I think this was supposed to have been in the previous episode before Dr. Senator's death, and they've put it here because they had too much material in the previous episode. And so as Noah Hawley was Frankensteining together this middle episode, this was one of the scenes that kind of got moved from the previous episode into it, because it doesn't really work very well as a flashback, to be honest. The way it's structured, I think they've done their best to make it relate to
what is going on with Lloyd Cannon in that moment, but I don't think it reveals anything particularly useful that we might, there's no reason for us not to have heard this in the previous episode. The only reason it's here is because it has to be sandwiched in somewhere, and I thought it was pretty glaring that was the case.
While you're on the subject of like editing and direction and whatnot, I have noticed it's really a fucking obvious Noah Hawley didn't direct these 2 episodes because it's lacking Noah Hawley's tricks.
Right.
His like split screening and stuff and his weird transitions, which I've come to associate with everything he does. So when that's not there, it almost seems normal.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it makes sense. The other side of this, Anton Duminy, who has been a presence in the season since the start. Like, we have seen him. He was one of Josto's men who was sitting looking very uneasy next to Gaetano in the bar, I think in season episode 2 or 3. So he's been around, but he's not really been a character up until this episode. And so I do feel there is some of the pacing and structure here and getting us to sympathise with this character in this episode was a bit out of nowhere. It would have been better to have seeded this a wee bit earlier down the line. Now, I appreciate this is difficult. This is a large ensemble cast. There are a lot of characters in this show. I do have a sneaking suspicion, though, there was more with this character in the early episodes that just get edited out. Because Noah Hawley's usually good with this kind of stuff. And every season of the show has been an ensemble. But this is probably the biggest ensemble he's ever worked with. And I do have... I just get a strong sense that this character probably had at least a couple of beats in the early episodes that did not make it to the screen. And so... it probably wouldn't have seemed so suddenly out of nowhere when he arrives here to do the visit to Camp Elegance. Because for me, I feel, even though I had recognised his face from previous episodes, I did just feel like, I've just gotten to know this character. And suddenly he's about to die. It all felt a wee bit crammed in. It felt a smidge Lovecraft country. Okay, so start of the episode, I think we'll go character by character because it's easier to go that way rather than sequentially through the episode. We see Ethelreda at the start of the episode. She's barely in this episode as well, which is another thing that makes me think, I feel like there should have been a wee bit more of her. But we begin the episode, she gets off the bus, she comes into the house, her parents sing happy birthday. Her very haunted parents, has to be said, after their meeting with Lloyd Cannon.
Did you notice the cake had
I
been
did.
hastily reassembled with like the big dip in it?
I thought that was a beautiful touch, actually. Yeah, I did notice that.
Maybe it's because I've been watching the Great British Bake Off, but I was very in tune with the part of the cake that was missing.
Do you mean the Great British Baking Show? The Great British Bake Off? So, each of these characters is a bit haunted here, because Ethelreda is coming back from her confrontation with Deafy. Parents have just had the confrontation with Lloyd Cannon, so there's a whole lot of unspoken, things going on here about what each character has recently gone through, and they all basically have gone through the same thing because they've all willingly given up Zelmir, essentially. We then go into this kind of Ethelreda's headspace at this moment, where she sees herself alone in the darkness with the cake, except she's not alone. Did you notice?
Yeah.
We get to see the spooky face in the corner of the screen, which I don't know whether that was meant to be an Exorcist nod, but
it felt like it. It had some Exorcist vibes going on.
So this is the same spooky figure we've seen a few times now. And I did check, apparently the character is just credited as Snowman. So make it that what you will. So I guess the questions are at this point, what does this presence represent? Because there's a few possibilities here. It could be racism, it could be white supremacy, it could be something literal in this family's past, some transgression that needs to be addressed at some point, or is it literally the personification of the curse or the devil that Zelmir and Swanee were discussing in the earlier episode, or is it something else entirely?
It's difficult to know with where Hawley's concerned.
It is really difficult to know, even as a viewer of the previous seasons, because this season's definitely pushing the boat out on this in a way in which the other seasons haven't done so much. There are surreal, weird, and possibly supernatural moments, as I've said before on this podcast in the previous seasons. But I feel like this one has really been hammered quite a bit. Like this, we're really meant to receive this presence the same way you would receive exactly that, what is it, Captain Howdy from The Exorcist? We are meant to get that vibe. It's definitely in horror territory, there's no doubt about it. That's the way it's been staged and presented. It does feel a wee bit like new territory for the show. Anyway, that smoothed over cake is still funny.
I'm assuming we'll find out.
Or maybe we won't. Maybe Noah Hawley will do a pure "what year is this?"
I was going to say, what snowman is this?
That's the Twin Peaks: The Return reference for you kids. So that's about as much as we get of Ethel Reader in this episode. So it's just that one short scene, which does make me think, yeah, there should have been more of her in a single episode. So yeah, I do feel the editing structure there, yeah, it's not quite what it could be. Moving on though to Otis Weff. I like how when we're in his apartment from the door, looking at the door from the inside, we immediately know where we are because we hear him knocking his own door. He comes in, he goes for a piss, and he gets Fargoed with the shower curtain. So this is a direct homage to the scene from Fargo in which this same thing happens. Yep. Fargo the movie, that is.
I was like, aha, I've seen this before.
I need unguent. So this is the first of two what you could argue are fake-outs as to characters looking like they're near death but then being kind of rescued, because Loy cuts open the curtain and basically tells Otis that he owns him now. Outside we see Deffy. Of course, he's staking Otis out, so he knows that Loy Cannon has gone in there, so he's completely on the ball here. Again, side note, this is the only time we see Deffy in this episode, which again feels a bit unnatural. So the other character we have the fake out with is, of course, our own favourite Nacho Libre. And when we see him catch up with him here, he's just catching up on a bit of dress mannequin stabbing, as you do, because clearly this show has not informed me enough that this guy is a complete fucking loon. And by this point, I'm like, this is too much.
I was almost as excited for his death as I was for Tech's death. And yet it still hasn't presented itself.
Right. I did feel it was going to be a bit too easy for him to die here. But yes, likewise, I was going, oh, please, just kill him.
I punched the air when he got the headshot. I was like, yes!
But as we discussed, he does show kind of his true colours here when he sends the other guy out. And he's hearing all the shooting going on downstairs as Zelmare and Swanee are making short work of the goons. So he's trembling, he's got the hair trigger, he's dropping his bullets. And as soon as he started blazing his bullets through that door, I knew it was that guy on the other side of the door. I thought that was fairly obvious, but that was fine. Swanee sneaking in behind him. Like, the mechanics of this, I'm not sure about, because isn't he like a story up?
I'm sure there's like a fire escape or something, you know. These old
but the other thing is, this is like the middle of winter as well. And Swanee's climbing up there, she's opened the window.
And he's not noticed.
Right, we're just meant to think he does not notice. I guess he's so completely immersed in fear at this point that, yeah, okay, whatever, fine. But when Swanee delivered that shot into what seemed like the back of his head, I did punch the air as well. I was like, oh, yes, he's done. Dunzo, Washington. Zelmare turns up and says, you shot him, ? They said take him alive, and it was that point. It's like, oh no, he's going to still be alive. And of course he was still alive. I don't understand the biological mechanics of how he survived that gunshot.
Later on you see it seems like it caught like the side of the back of his head.
I know, and Swanee shot him at almost point blank range.
Yeah.
Is she really that bad of a shot? I mean, surely not. She'd have to be the worst outlaw that the US has ever seen. I guess maybe that's how they ended up in prison.
Well, like a get-the-fuck-outlaw.
That does deserve a candle, I think.
But yeah, I was sad to see that he was still breathing.
Yeah. I did enjoy though them dragging him out on the rug. It did make me think of that rug really tied the room together. So we then go back to Loy's warehouse where this other character, by the way, the boxer, he's another thing why I think this is a bit disjointed and why I think some characters have had their screen time cut quite a bit. I actually noticed when I was reading the Rolling Stone review of this episode, and they pointed this out, that the actor who plays the boxer here is actually listed as one of the main cast members, not a guest star. He's a main cast member all season, and we have barely seen him. And the actress who plays Swanee is not listed as a main character. She's listed as a guest star, as she has had way more screen time than this guy. So that makes the conclusion that the Rolling Stone reviewer came to, in which I kind of agree with, is it does seem like some of these characters have been shuffled about in the editing. So yeah, I feel like we should know a bit more about this guy by this scene, but in this scene it just says, oh, this is my boxing pal.
and it does kind of undercut it a wee bit. I'm not quite sure either what Loy's story about Sugar Ray Robinson was meant to achieve. This is one of the few instances of Fargo doing some of this monologuing that actually ended up being guilty of some of the things that people criticised the monologuing for. It ended up being a bit empty. I'm not sure what it was supposed to convey, really. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it seemed like a monologue for a monologue's sake.
It did totally feel that way.
It could have, other than to just introduce the fact that his pal was a boxer.
Right, yeah.
He could have, like, that scene would have worked better if he just said your life is a series of mistakes, but this is the one, Dr. Center was the one that got you killed.
Uh-huh.
And it would have been as effective for him to walk out and just leave him to get the shit kicked out of him by...
It would have been. And what I also disliked is, of course, Gaetano just reverts back to cackling madman mode. And I'm just like, no, come on. Give me some progression with this guy, for fuck's sake. Like, I get it, he's switching on the bravado again, but let's recap. He's been shot in the back of the head.
And he was clearly fearful for his life when it happened.
And now suddenly he has his wits about him to suddenly pull up the wall of bravado. I wasn't buying it. I think this was maybe my least favourite scene in the episode. Lloyd Cannon is, meanwhile, also putting the pressure on Otis Weff. I'm enjoying this stuff. I think Jack Houston is doing a great job. The more stressed Otis Weff gets, the better Jack Houston becomes in this role.
I love that he is just fucked between two crime families.
Yeah.
Both of whom think they control him, and they both do, basically, but he can't do anything to the other one without getting shafted either way.
Yeah, exactly. And also both of whom seem to think he has more power in the police department than he actually has. Which is getting some good comic mileage out of that. Okay, so we do get the return this episode of Abel Vellante. I was glad he returned. It's nice to have one of those characters with the gravitas. Because now we don't have Dr. Senator, it's nice to have this guy back at least. So I like the way, I love his reaction here when he comes back and finds that everything has just turned to shit. And it's like, I'm out the room for 2 minutes and the kids have turned the place upside down kind of thing. So he's delivering the message from the mafia honchos in New York. Josto has to fix things with the cannons. Now, I like the vagueness of that statement. It could be interpreted a number of ways.
Yeah, but he clearly interprets it one way rather than the other.
Yeah, Josto immediately goes for what he thinks is more favourable. The way this is played actually is quite nice. Before he gets to the second point, Calamita turns up and tells him that Gaetano has been taken. And Josto's all kind of blasé and goes, fuck him, fuck Gaetano. And he turns back to Abel and says, what's the second condition? He's like, you have to fix things with your brother. That was pretty great.
That was, top comic timing.
A side note here, by the way, the character that returns with Abel Violante is a character also from Season 2. Not in this instance played by the same actor, because that would be silly. But, so that is... For those of us who are familiar with Season 2, it does make us a bit more intrigued about how certain things are going to get to where they are by the time we get to the 70s in the annals of Fargo. But all I would say is, don't expect that guy to return to New York. Okay, so there's some heightening of tension between Calamita and Josto. I did quite enjoy some of this stuff. He is going to try and use Calamita as his fall guy. That seems to be his plan. Mm-hmm. He's going to have Calamita kill Satchel and then make it look as if Calamita went rogue on his own, which would not be a tough thing to sell. So it's actually a pretty decent plan, except for the fact of, killing a kid. I don't want to make it sound like I'm endorsing that, listeners. All I mean is, from Josto's perspective, let me be clear, I can see why he thinks it's a good idea. Josto's whole plan here, how are you feeling about it?
It makes me wonder if Josto is actually smarter than everyone gives him credit for.
I've seen a few reviewers have said that same thing.
He spends so much time trying to convince himself that he's suitable for the position that he's in now, that if he expends a little of that mental energy into actual tactical planning, that he might actually make a pretty good mob boss.
Yeah. This is one of the moments where, probably one of the few moments where Josto, he was genuinely chilling here in moments, because this is a horrible thing he's planning to do. He's pretty confident if he's able to pull it off, he'll forget all about it. It will not weigh on his conscience. You know what I mean? There is that scary edge to Josto, and I feel like more and more of that is leaking through as the show is progressing.
I think Jason Schwartzman is getting a raw deal from some of the reviewers, because I am actually finding that because it's been drip fed to us, that side of the character, I'm finding it more and more convincing the more we see of it. And in this episode, I was like, yeah, no, okay, no, you've actually convinced me that this piece of shit would actually do this. Speaking of Rabbi Milligan, now he and Satchel are studying literature. I really like this scene. The book that they're studying is The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair was a self-avowed Marxist, which made him very controversial in the States, as you can imagine. And that novel is all about the kind of harshness of the reality of people, of the working class and the poor and the immigrants in Chicago at that time, and other industrialized cities. And Sinclair wrote that particularly with a view to the meat industry, because he was familiar with the meat industry. And so he was using that industry particular to really just as a broad canvas to show the ways in which all industries do this, are guilty of the same exploitation. It's a really fascinating novel. It's worth a read. But the interesting thing about the way The Jungle was received was that it was not even received necessarily as a socialist text. It's quite famous for being one of the most misunderstood books in American literature, because what most people got from it apparently was that it was just about exposing unsanitary practices in the American meatpacking industry. and it led to a mass public outcry in the States, which led to reforms, and so there was like meat inspections brought in and all this. It saw a complete overhaul of the meat industry, but it ended up having zero effect whatsoever in advancing the cause of socialism. And Sinclair himself actually had a great quote about this when a journalist once asked him how he felt after he'd explained that what his intentions actually were with that novel. Interviewer said to him, well, how did that make you feel when you saw how it went? And his quote was, that is quite a famous quote, you may have heard it. He said, I aimed at the American public's heart, and by accident I hit it in the stomach. Yeah, but the main character, actually the character in the part that Rabbi Milligan and Satchel are reading here, it's an interesting part of the book, because it's a part where one of the characters is suddenly having this existential realization that here he is in one of the richest cities imaginable, and he is going to starve as if he was living in a third world country, and anything he tries to do to help himself, authority will hammer down on him, and it will end his life one way or the other, either by throwing him in jail or by literally ending his life. And it does make me think, I mean, Noah Hawley is usually really astute with this kind of stuff, where he inserts these kind of literary references. So there are several characters here at the moment that this might apply to. Watch this space, I guess, is what I'm saying. So Otis Weft turns up at the Fada house. I really enjoyed this tense kind of Otis Weft staring over at Satchel, fumbling in his pocket for his gun, Rabbi Milligan noticing something's not quite right, gradually reaching for his own gun. I thought the tension there was absolutely superb.
It was great. I thought shit was going to go down.
I really did as well. I was 100% prepared for it to happen, but I guess you could say this is the third fake out in this episode. And once again, it's Calamita that kind of cuts the tension, because he comes up and he kind of takes Otis Weft away for a ride, which surely this isn't going to turn out well. Otis Weft is having a whole series of bad days here. I like also, it's a reference to Calamita. Have you got rid of that marshal yet? It's like clearly none of these people have any idea just how dogged and how single-minded Deafy Wickware is. Clearly none of them have met him, or they would not be asking this question. So this is where we get the Antoon scenario, and it was at this point I was like, oh yeah, this guy, I remember his face from like episode 2, and I was like, it would have been nice to get more with this character, because suddenly the way this is introduced, I did feel the way it was staged was we were supposed to be a bit more familiar with him. Did you get that sense, or is it just me?
It made me feel like I'd missed something, to be honest.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling that same way. I have to say this actor's performance, though, is doing a lot of the work, because he looks like he has got that really brow-beaten carrying the weight of the entire universe as soon as he's assigned this.
He does not want to be doing this task.
No, and I did feel sorry for him. There was a lot in the expressions, a lot in the actor's posture. It's just like, okay, no, you're conveying this really well, so that's papering over a lot of the cracks, I guess. So he gets Rabbi Milligan to go and meet Josto while he takes Satchel, quote-unquote, for a ride somewhere. And we get Rabbi Milligan saying goodbye to Satchel, the old catchphrase, if I don't come back, I'm either dead or in jail. At this moment, James, how did you think this was going to get down?
I thought Rabbi Milligan was going to end up either dead or in jail. I'm sure that's going to happen at some point. He can't keep saying that catchphrase without one of those things happening.
Yeah, that was a possibility. The latter was a possibility in my mind as well. I actually was not afraid for Rabbi Milligan. I felt like the use of that catchphrase here, I'm starting to take it for granted that that's a signpost that it's not going to happen. So it'll be at a point when he's not mentioned it, that if that's going to happen, then that's when it will happen. I also have taken it for granted, and I shouldn't take anything for granted in this show, but I have taken it for granted that at some point Rabbi Milligan and Satchel are kind of going to go on the run. I kind of saw that happening. I don't know why exactly, but I just kind of saw it going down that way. Well, there is another reason why I suspected it might happen, but I can't say anything about that.
Is it because it's going to be a spoiler for me?
Possibly, yeah.
So I'm assuming
all I'll say is there are theories about a couple of characters here, and the more this season goes on, the more it seems those theories are correct.
Right. Cool.
So, yeah, another chilling aspect of Josto here is he clearly doesn't give a fuck about Zero. And Zero is his kid brother. And it's like, dude, who broke you? What is wrong with you, man? But the way he's talking to Rabbi Milligan here about both Zero and Satchel is with equal amounts of, there's no emotion there, there's no attachment, it's all business. And it's all a mess he just wants to wash his hands of. And he's clearly willing to sacrifice Zero, which I shouldn't be shocked about that, but it's like, man, there are no good guys on this show. But he actually, when he uses the phrase, the kid's done, about Satchel, I have mixed feelings about that. Now, on the one hand, yeah, okay, that hammers home once again, Josto is meaning business here. But is Josto so blind to the fact that Rabbi Milligan has developed a bit of a fondness for this kid? Because that seems like a bad idea to have said that to Rabbi Milligan.
But on the other hand, maybe Josto assumes that by that point the kid is dead anyway. So maybe just tell him after the fact, because he has that whole no one questions me kind of aspect, so he probably feels like I can say that in front of Rabbi, and he's not going to do shit about it because it's already happened.
Do you know what? It's actually possible, and now that I'm thinking about it, if some of these scenes were rearranged, maybe it would make more sense if that scene happened a wee bit later. Like if there had been another intervening scene to make it seem like more time had passed, that would give Josto the idea that the deed had been done, kind of thing. Because the way it's presented to us, it seems very immediate. And I guess that's why my immediate thought was, why would you say that? 'Cause surely Rabbi Millen's immediately going to go, well, I'm going to go stop this. Unless Josto is so just completely self-absorbed that he just did not even notice there was a relationship developing between those two characters, which I guess is possible, but I don't know. I didn't totally buy it. The line kind of bothered me a wee bit. I thought it was a very easy way to inform Rabbi Milligan about what was happening, and I guess the script had to do that some way or other. Yeah, I mean, again, not a deal breaker, but it was just one of those things. I was like, I just don't know that. I don't know that Josto would. I feel like he could have chosen better words there. But anyway, Rabbi Milligan goes back to the Fada house and kills a goon, so he's definitely no longer on the Christmas card list. So Rabbi Milligan is definitely no longer with the Fadas at this point. I think that's done. I think we can say.
Yep.
Shakes up Antoine's wife, so yeah, there's no going back from this. And it seems like Antoine's wife knew where Antoine would be going, so clearly this was going to be a special place to Antoine, somewhere with meaning. So this whole Antoine and Satchel thing at Camp Elegance, I don't know about you, I really loved this scene. I found this really affecting. I've written here in my notes, it's like the grimmest ever Werther's original ad.
Now I'm the grandfather, and where else would I kill Satchel? But
yeah, I was 100% getting, or if Stella Artois ever did a Werther's original ad. So this Camp Elegance, I did try looking this up. It's not a real place, but there are places like this where Italian POWs were taken to be interned until the end of the war. The campaign, the Montesino campaign that he mentioned, was a real thing towards the end of the Second World War. And the whole thing about the Italian soldiers being starved out in the snow, and that detail about him cooking his belt, great detail. So fucking bleak.
It's not the first time I've heard things about POWs having to cook and eat their shoe leather to survive.
Yeah. So yeah, he was brought starving, completely disillusioned with everything that had happened in his home country. And so he arrives in America, and of course America welcomes immigrants with all these promises, all the indoctrination about the American dream, about how you too can contribute and be a good American. So the show hammering this stuff home again. Really powerful in this scene, though. I thought it really hit the right note. And this thing about him carving his new identity in the stone, I thought was perfect. I really thought that was a perfect human tragic moment. And there was actually something particularly powerful about seeing the words carved in. Anton Domini American. Yeah, it's fucking tragic. I've also written in my notes here, is there anything at the end of the day more American than contributing to the most vicious edge of white supremacy? Which essentially is what he's doing here by executing a black child.
Living the American dream. But he can't do it.
He cannot do it. He's too much of a human being, and weirdly he cannot shoot a kid in the back. So I really felt for him as he was putting his gun back in his pocket. I was like, this poor guy, man. When you consider, I really was feeling the sheer weight of everything he said about his origin story, but having what the horror he must have gone through in Italy for a start, like being forced to fight for a fascist government, and yeah, I really felt sorry for this guy. But I did not have much time to feel sorry for him, because by the time he'd pocketed his gun, we get the Rabbi Milligan's bullet just blasting through his chest. Well, I have to admit, for a brief second, I thought he'd shot himself.
So did I. I thought when he slammed the gun in his pocket, it had gone off.
The thing is, that would have been a perfect Fargo touch if he actually ended up just shooting himself accidentally. This kid playing Satchel was really good here. Just the fear and the confusion. I thought this kid was really good. Yeah, again, the tragedy here, I was feeling the full weight of the pathos at this point. When the kid says, I'm scared, and Rabbi Milligan just says, I am as well. Now they're out on the lam, and now they have nobody. What is going to happen with these two characters? I mean, I may know at least how that one person at least survives to season 2, but that's as much as I know. As to how they get there, I don't know. It's a weird one, this, because Hawley has definitely not signposted prequel here. He's kept it very, very subtle. But there's just enough in it that if you're familiar with season 2, you automatically get what the references are. But there's just enough here that he's actually doing what I think. I'll make this brief because I don't want to say it and it's going to spoil it for you, but I do want to make this point that he's doing what great prequels do, which is, and it's what great writers do generally, particularly in TV drama in the prestige era, such as it is they write themselves into corners. And I feel like halfway through this story, Hawley was writing himself into a corner because he knew to a certain extent what a couple of these characters' destinies were. But he's complicated it here because it's now a complicated journey to get to that point. Earlier in the season, it would have been simpler. He's complicated it a great deal here by having this happen. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he gets from A to B. So, Orietta Mayflower, once again, a bit underserved in this episode, which makes me think both sets of Orietta in these two episodes were meant to be in one episode. It certainly seems that way, because the footage of her slamming her head against the wall, we get that here in this episode as well, and it seems like what we get here in this episode was supposed to bookend originally the bit we got in the previous episode. That's the way I'm reading it anyway.
Can I just say, though, this scene, the guy playing Dr. Harvard is fucking amazing. This is one of my favourite television performances of the year, hands down. Just the weirdness and the pure, like, the haughtiness is
I am
amazing.
Loving this guy as well. He's a classic Fargo and also a classic Coen Brothers archetype of somebody, one of those very upper class white males who are incapable of uttering any sentence that it does not just come across like a thesaurus entry. I mean the delivery as well, his whole theatrical mannerisms as well. This is a guy,
facial expressions and
This is a guy who's so in love with the idea of his own brilliance that he clearly relishes the smell of his own farts. It's a great portrayal. So he's received this letter from Ethelreda. So he calls in Orietta. The way this played out was it was just so weird. Like, these two characters are so fucking bizarre. This is another example of that. Both these characters together should be overkill, because both these performances are so mannered. But I'm just enjoying both characters so much that I'm like, fine, it's okay. Because both these characters they're at sitcom height. That is how high these performances are. But nonetheless, it's actually not undermining the drama in any way. It's good shit. We do notice that Orietta notices the handwriting of the letter. She gets a good look, and we know that Ethelreda has carelessly left her journal back in the Chief Wiggum Forbidden Closet of Mystery. But yeah, as he's going off in his spiel, there's this moment here where Orietta drifts off into a white noise, which is always a good shorthand that this person is mental. Just in case we had not gathered that already. So we see I also like the mannerism where when he's putting that letter back in the drawer.
Oh, she reaches for it.
This is great. And she pretends she was just reaching for his hand.
That was so good.
That was great shit. And I suppose I completely bought that. In the hands of a lesser writer and lesser performances, this is the kind of thing I'd be like, that's all a bit convenient. But when Dr. Harvard just says, all right, you've convinced me, it was like something like The Simpsons, the way he delivered that. I was like, all right, you've convinced me, Mr. Simpson. But I was like, all right, fair enough. These two characters are so bizarre. They're in a weird way on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
But our departure from Orietta here, and indeed the ending of the episode, I think, is when she walks out of that hospital room and the patient finally croaks and she cracks her first smile that we've seen. And it's like, finally. So Orietta does seem very disconnected at this point from the rest of the plot for these last couple of episodes. It does seem like a long time since we've spent any time with her. And I think that is largely as a result of the jiggery pokery that's been going on with the stitching together of these episodes. I was looking up on Wikipedia just to see what the director and writer layout is for the episodes, and all three, this episode, previous episode, and the next episode, all directed by Dana Gonzalez, which makes me think Dana Gonzalez was only the director originally of 2 subsequent episodes. Because you very rarely get 3 on Fargo subsequently. So I think that's what's happened here. I will say, though, as far as Orietta's story goes, one thing it has done in its favour, it did seem like Orietta's wait between the last time we saw her and waiting for this guy to die, it did seem like it has lasted forever. That she's been in her own personal purgatory.
It was pretty great. I think that's just going to turn her at a snapping point a little more than she was at already. Although she seems like she's constantly at a snapping point.
yeah.
But I'm intrigued to see what effect she'll have on the larger. Like you said, it tends to be when the dominoes fall.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intrigued to see where she is in that sort of domino rally of fuckardliness that's undoubtedly going to happen.
There's also the ongoing relationship with Josto, which does feel like it's taking a back seat, but again, I think it's because of the way things have been put together. But what effect are these two characters going to have on each other from now on?
Maybe he'll be more mellow again after some drugs and a weird car hand job. Maybe he's just missing that.
Hey, who wouldn't be, am I right? A wee Battle Hymn of the Republic hand job to pass the time. Yeah, that'll settle anybody's nerves.
What would you score episode 6?
Episode 6, I'm going to score this 5.55 out of 9. And that's not because any of it was bad per se. It was just a very strange viewing experience as an episode. It was just a wee bit frustrating in places. I will give a separate rating, though, just for how I think the story is unfolding. And that is way higher. I would actually give the season as a whole at this point about 8 5s out of 9.
Yeah,
because I'm really engaged with everything that's happening. It's just what's let it down in the last couple of episodes was just the structure was a wee bit skew with.
I would agree. I'd say probably 5.5 for this, but I'd say easily 8 for the whole series. I'm really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of mid-season, there's obviously been a bit of cutting and pasting to create an extra episode, or stuff that Noah Hawley felt had to be in there.
Yeah, no, I have faith in Noah Hawley as a storyteller, so despite this wee bump we've just had, I have full faith it'll wrap up in a satisfying fashion. I've not been dissatisfied with a single season of this show so far. Not everybody says that, by the way. There's some people who are really down in some of the seasons.
But fuck those people.
Yeah, fuck those people. Chuck them in Chief Wiggum's Forbidden Closet of Mystery. Take them on a one-way trip to Camp Elegance.
So, Craig.
Mm-hmm.
Having said all that, what are we going to do for our next episode?
I believe our next episode is drum roll. We are returning finally at last to our Mr. Robot rewatch. Yes, folks, we didn't forget. We always planned to come back.
We didn't call this podcast fSobriety just because we drink during it.
We got a bit sidetracked by the fact that Lovecraft Country was a thing, and now Fargo is a thing, and music is a thing, and all the other things we like to talk about are things. Mr. Robot Rewatch is continuing. That will be our next episode. We will be talking about Season 1, Episode 2. So if you are into that, please do join us for that, and we will hopefully have a good time.
It will be great. Join us, friend. Have a little drink with us while we dissect it. In the meantime, thanks for sticking with us for episode Lucky 7.
Yeah, thanks as ever for listening, folks. We do really appreciate it.
Yeah, if you like what we've been doing here, give us a tweet, leave us a comment.
Positive reviews on iTunes are always welcome.
Tell a friend, tell some friends, tell everyone. You know, I think word of mouth is a good way to spread the word of the podcast as well. But we appreciate every single one of you listening and sticking with us. For the moment, however, I'm just going to check the levels on my bottle of Russian Standard vodka.
How is that bottle looking, James?
That appears very much to be half the bottle.
Cheers, folks.
fSobriety, Episode 7, Latecraft Korntry, was conceived by Craig Woods and James Hamilton, edited by James Hamilton, and is a production of Half the Bottle. The theme music is Colossal Estates by Errors from the album Lease of Life, available on Rock Action Records. Come and say hello, friend, on our social media outlets, on facebook.com/fSobrietyPodcast, and on Twitter at fSobrietyCast. Tell a friend. Tell all your friends. Bark at strangers, we appreciate it. Apologies to our regular listeners for the delay in this episode's release. It's really late. Or really early. In the immortal words of Irene at Hap's Diner, do you want to hear about her special juice? We don't have any. Until next episode. Hell God baby no, I found something.